Just sent it by chat.
Hmm.
This is one of the images.
Yes. Kashi, can you hear us now? No. It seems Kashi can't. Nothing happening?
Hi.
Hi, Hussein.
Hey, Hussein.
Hi.
Hello. Hello.
Am I supposed to be in this meeting?
Yes,
Yes.
of course.
I was
Let's
just checking. Just checking.
Let's just tell him no. Kashi.
Because there are only 4 people. Oh, there are 16. Okay. I just saw 4 faces, so I got confused.
Hey, but there is some problem with Kashi's sound. We can't hear him. He can't hear us.
He's asking why am I not able to hear?
Now it says connected. Can you hear us, Kashi, now?
Yeah, I can hear.
Oh, okay. Good. Okay. I'm relieved. Hussein, you look different today. यार बदलता रहता है.
Now he's on mute.
He said something which he didn't want us to hear, basically.
No, I said I'm emulating you.
Oh, I see.
Chaya.
ठीक है. नहीं वो तो ठीक है.
बहुत साल लगेंगे.
never
look at
बहुत साल और बहुत कड़ी तपस्या लगेगी. ऐसे ही नहीं होगा.
तपस्या नहीं होती है. वो खुद ब खुद हो जाता है. उसमें खाली टाइम का जरूरत होता है.
Just look at Vignesh. He has been trying for so many years.
I was about to say, aren't we all? कभी खुजली ज्यादा हो जाता है ना, तो क्लीन शेव भी हो जाता है कभी.
No, Sudipto is going in the other direction.
Yeah. Oh, Shilpa is also here.
Hi.
Hi there.
Hi.
Hi, Shilpa.
Hi, Kashi. Hi. How are you?
Hi, how are you?
Good.
Riaz is here. Sarosh is here.
Hi. Hello.
Hi, Sarosh. Oh, Riaz needs a couple of minutes.
Okay.
Our first group to go on would be, do we have a list? Did Riaz put up anything already? So the remaining groups
Yeah,
are.
I think it was there.
Yeah, I have put.
You have.
So it's Kotla first, Meroli, and then Dholakon.
So is the Kotla group ready? Are they here?
Yes.
Okay. So would you like to start? Does I don't think Kashi needs an introduction. I think he has had some from Riaz.
No, I'll still just well, Kashi knows the studio, so I think
But he
that's
needs
sufficient.
to be, I guess he needs to be introduced.
Yes.
Because-
So it's
Well, I'm a
Professor,
human being, so that should be.
That's not
Professor Vishwanath Kashikar.
नहीं रियाज करना पड़ेगा.
Sorry.
करना पड़ेगा.
Introduce करना पड़ेगा.
No, of course.
Although we
So-
all know him still.
We know him. So yes, so this we'll start the second and final session of discussions at Porsche's Alter Ego Studio. And this evening we have with us Vishwanath Kashikar, Professor Vishwanath Kashikar, who teaches at CEPT University. Yeah, Kashi, it gives me great pleasure in adding that. Vishwanath's been teaching at the school for over a decade and has been doing very interesting research work as well as studio work in the area of housing. This includes both the social dimension of housing as well as the commercial part of it. His studios often look very closely at the at ideas of practice, and we are really happy to have him here. Thanks, Kashi, for being here for this last session. Okay, is there any, yeah. So with that, the Kotla group can start their presentation. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, from our group, we have Bansi, Nivedita, Shivani, and Andrea, and myself here today. The others are in and around. They would be there. So we have some network issues. So Andrea is logging in from a remote location. So we're not able to log in through videos, but we definitely have our voice in. And we have Bansi and Shivani taking over you through the presentation.
Vani? Okay. So, can you all hear me? Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay.
I think one of you guys has a loud fan on, which may be giving us some disturbance. You all might just.
Wait, I. Okay, is it better now?
Yeah.
Okay. So because we're all in and out, we put our points together. So I'm just going to read them out and you guys can add in wherever you want. Okay. So Porsche Studios was kicked off by sending us into a state where for the first time we began to consider time as a key factor in design. Suddenly the aspect of time seemed to have an equal if not larger influence than space in design. So this was our first exercise and this is a compilation of all the work that we have put together in this small video. The video actually has sound too, but
Bansi, maybe the song will play.
It's okay, I think. No, it's done.
Would you like to have the sound played? Then you have to share which sound.
Oh, no, I think
Will
it's
do
okay.
that? Is it okay?
Yeah,
I think
sure.
it's okay. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I'll move to the next one then.
So we
Can
began
you
to look at.
share? Sorry, if there's a video, I'm sorry, if there's a video and you want to share the sound, then you have to click on share sound at the bottom when you start sharing screen. Just before that, there are 2 check boxes at the bottom when you choose your screen.
Okay. Do we want the sound, like, do we want to replay it or shall we move ahead?
It's okay, I think most of it was there in the video.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so we began to look at human beings and our built worlds within a larger, humbling perspective of time, and our collective perspectives of the role of architecture and monuments began to change. So this is our second exercise, where so I'll just read it out. With the next few exercises, we looked at how tools, practices, and geography were closely interlinked, and how this put us in the context of the natural world. It was no longer humans versus nature. We operated largely under the same principles that other organisms did, and this reminded us to consider closely our surroundings, other creatures, and all demographics, and walk barefoot on our geography, like Chayasa puts it. So so this is a correlation of the of our different individual ones. So the one on the left talks about blurring boundaries between the inside and outside. The one on top is of the practice of mica mining, and the one below is of settlement and migration in the case of Indus Valley civilization. Okay, so the next one was defining our core values. So defining our core values was like being given a magic wand with which we could wield to create a utopian environment of our minds. We were the young, idealistic policymakers, and we were so surprised to see that everyone in our group, no matter where we were from and how we lived, had strikingly similar ideas on what ideals should govern a living environment. So we spent hours discussing the idea of coexistence, justice, and working within the idea of cyclic time and process, and creating a stimulating space of gathering and dialogue. So these were the main ideas of our core value: that's justice, stimulation, coexistence, and the cyclic nature of time. Okay, so the next one was Chinese whispers, where the other group passed on their core values to us. So Chinese whispers had us guessing at what the ideal environment of the next group looked like, and we realized that theirs also was quite similar to ours. But except that they had a notion that going back to a non-industrial beginning was where we needed to be. So we focused on the experiences that came out through our received values. People who live according to natural cycles in terms of food, tradition, passed down knowledge, inclusivity for all, permeability, and blurred boundaries. While we imbibed the overall value system and the idea of living that was portrayed in the core values, we pondered further on how these systems could work within a larger scheme of a fast-paced city. We were now at a stage where we had our first physical interaction with the site and the city, enriched by the enchanting stories that were shared to us through Poche conversations. It was finally time to take our abstract collage that we had stitched together and ask it to walk down our site. So in this collage, we had put together all the ideas that we received in our core values and laid it out on the site. So these were the ideas of nodes, permeable boundaries, and an idea of coexistence between nature and human beings, and also the cyclic nature of time. And we also illustrated instances of this in this section that goes at the bottom of the screen. Okay, the next one is we designed a journey from the imperial imposing India Gate through Delhi's busy streets, through the window of time and history that was the Purana Killa, and finally a homecoming to the banks of the Yamuna. So this was the red route that linked the India Gate through the Purana Killa to the Yamuna. So, yeah, the next slide. Yeah. So this is an initial conceptual approach of how we envision the fort interacting with the areas around it. An intervention looking at the presence of a ruin, navigating the level difference, creating nodes of multi-user spaces, and using materials like adobe, mud, and bamboo that would work with our cyclic aspect of time. We imagined humans as hollowing out a pathway through a land that was inhabited by other species. In the face of the monumental, the central vista, the Purana Killa and the Yamuna, we discussed the role that our additions would play to the context of time, drawing from the past and looking into the future, with temporality as the key in the face of the desire for timelessness. We added transient, experience-rich spaces all along the journey. Okay. We then looked at opening up the gates of the fort. Since one of our main ideas was permeability, this was something that we looked into. By integrating the pathway through the fort, we aimed to dissolve the edges and rejoin them with the activities of the city. We then focused on 2 points of the trail that we explored further, the west and east entry exits to the fort. A revitalization of the moat with discrete trails was looked into. I think you can go to the next one. No, the plan. Yeah. A revitalization of the moat with discrete trails that led down to a place of celebration on its banks and a place of learning under the vegetated cover was investigated. These functions were burrowed out of the earth and molded in earth to allow the remaining space to thrive as a wilderness. You can go to the section. The scale of the spaces was submissive and quiet in relation to the fort. So the trail from the India Gate would either be a walked trail or a cycling trail, and that would lead to the the entry to the fort that's mostly used now. So in our intervention, we've tried to keep the heights of our buildings in relation to the fort, so you can actually look over the roofs of our buildings and view the fort. And we've created in such a way that it steps down onto an OAT that is on the bank of the moat. So we've used the contours and integrated our plan to sort of navigate through the trees and the contours to reach down to the moat. The next one, please. So this is the exit from the fort, which is on the east side. So we tried to negotiate the 10-meter slope of the east gateway of the fort by proposing a large ramp made of earth from the side that housed activities like gathering spaces, chai shops, and a watchtower from where you could access the fort bastion and look across to both India Gate and Rajpath and also to the Yamuna. The ramp further led into pathways that meander through the market spaces, characterized by otlas under tree cover, community kitchens, spaces for cultivation, and small open-air theaters. Okay, so this is, wait, you can show the long section once. Yeah, so the first part of it is is up to the moat. The in-between is the inside of the fort, which we envisioned as a celebratory space with a lot of public gathering, and that leads up to the exit, which has which has a ramp that goes down and leads into a series of market spaces and otlas under the tree, and a small OAT for gathering. From here, the path leads further and leads to the bank of the Yamuna. Yeah, I can show the collage now. Yeah. So the collage shows the journey through the pathway on cycle or by foot, the vistas from the top of the fort, the encounters with the fort wall, and the journey down to the market and gathering spaces and beyond to the banks of the Yamuna. So we've illustrated like a few instances from the journey. Yeah, so this is the sketch that sort of encapsulates our idea of the journey from the India Gate to the Yamuna. You guys want to add anything?
I think we're good to go.
I did have a few questions, just more clarification than anything else. So thank you very much. That was really enjoyable. I really enjoyed the presentation and really quite a journey itself, the entire presentation, in addition to it being about a journey. I guess my questions were pretty just clarification questions, quite straightforward. You mentioned that you have privileged this notion of time versus a notion of object making, perhaps. And so can you say specifically how your interventions, your objects, the things that you add, because clearly you are actually adding few things, like at the bottom left, I kind of understand it as a series of ramps. What are the exact events, activities, temporal occupations of ground that you are talking about? Precisely, like what exactly do you imagine these events would be? Would they relate to festivals? What are they? Because in your representations, it doesn't seem to come through enough. And the other question I had was something you sort of alluded to, which was sort of handed out to you from one of the previous groups, which is this notion of going back to a pre-industrial past. More specifically, what were the kind of design values that you used to sort of shape these interventions? Like what were they informed by, other than in addition to this notion of temporality?
So the temporality, we mainly looked at it in terms of our material. So we looked at mud and bamboo, so that it would be a sort of contrast to the monumental and monumental architecture that's planned to stay forever. So we looked at it as something that could disintegrate and could be rebuilt again according to the situation at that time. In terms of our program, we have sort of made them into multi-use spaces. So we have these otlas and small platforms that are used as markets and could be transformed into something else in times of festivals and things like that. And yeah, I think
to add to the question on the second aspect, in terms of looking at the notion of time, the first question was regarding the notion of time, and the second was the aspect of the core values which we had picked up from the earlier group. To answer the second part, what we had understood from the core values of the previous group was to live in harmony with nature, and a sense of temporality, in the sense of the user group they identified was somebody like a nomad, but wherein we reconfigured it to the context of Delhi, saying that everyone is a nomad, everyone is temporal in Delhi, there is nobody a part of Delhi. So when we reconfigured it to the context of the city, we took the temporality of the living settlement to the aspect of the materials and the activities which would happen in that space. So we took the qualities of that life form into the aspect of design.
So so they had given us the idea of nomads and migrants. So instead of looking at them as specific user groups, we try to look at how do these people live and what are the values by which they live. So some of the values that we got was this idea of cyclic time and the coexistence with nature. So we took those forward in the design.
And they don't occupy the earth, they inhabit the earth. So therefore, all the activities in this place are nothing about occupancy. It's more about temporal inhabitation, usage, and moving on.
Thank you. That really helps. That really answers my question. I guess it directly points. It really helps that you also say that this is made out of mud or earth somehow, because just because a material is made out of, say, earth, just the forms that you sort of imply, right, with these large ramps that are almost landscape-like in nature. I wonder if they are as kind of easy to reorganize as you think of them to be, because we've had earthen buildings that have been there for centuries. It's more a question of sort of how you're actually shaping the architecture, right? Like how you're shaping the ground. It seems like it's more a receptacle for temporality than temporal in and of itself. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I think
it allows for temporal appropriation, right? But I think it's not, and that's fine. I don't think it has to be, but that's just perhaps a way of open it up to other kinds of interpretations.
Yes, I think the ramp as such might not, I don't know if we envision it to be like disintegrated and reused in the future, but the specific spaces that we've made, we've not made it very focused on a particular program, so it can be changed and can be relooked at in the future. So that was the aspect of temporality, I guess.
No, I like it. I'm just saying you can recraft your narrative slightly to say that the stuff doesn't have to change. What it holds can keep changing. So the temporality is one of event, one of program, whereas what you've built is really a container. It's a host that looks pretty. It looks like it's got the order of Purana Killa. It's got that kind of stature, at least from your sketches.
Yeah, so we tried to have the scale such that it complements the Purana Killa and not looks like a meek or a feeble thing going around it, rather than being with it. But again, we tried to we kept it through earth and mud to hold the temporality aspect.
I think it was like a negotiation between like the massive fort and the day-to-day activities that it leads into.
Yeah, thank you for the presentation. So I've been following the studio off and on. I think a lot, I heard a lot of the Poche conversations as well as some of your class discussions. And more interestingly, most of the time when I was listening to these conversations or your Zoom sessions, most of the time I was cooking. It used to be 7 or 8 in the night, so I would have my headphones on, not looking at the screen, because most of it was talk and not visual. And so in that context, I really like, and what I picked up from what you were talking was this journey from the India Gate to the Yamuna. Right? So do you have any sort of idea of roughly how much time it would take if I were to walk down from the India Gate to the banks of the Yamuna?
I think it's like around 2 kilometers.
No, I want it in time, not in space. We are talking of temporary.
In terms of time, it is about, that's where we have added activities within the junctures so that it depends. We want to increase the time. Basically, people, do not take note of these buildings and they, move on very fast across it, and we want to increase that span of time. Therefore, so it's totally depends on the person here.
It would
Yeah, but roughly if I were to just start walking down from India Gate towards the Jammu,
it would take an
Maybe like
hour, 45 minutes to hour. Yeah.
Yeah.
okay. Yeah, so to me that is a very interesting thing, because you started by saying, we are interested in time, and that intrigued you a lot. And I was also fascinated by this dimension of time. And how do we then start talking about space as time? Yeah? Not the physicality of it, but the temporal dimension of it. So in fact, I had no clue about how much time it would take. So while you were doing the presentation, I was quickly checking on Google Maps as to how far is it. And I was also, in fact, tying it to, the Kabir bhajans that Shabnam was singing. And I was wondering, if I start that video recording and start walking down this path of yours, will I end up at the end of the bhajan, or will I have to cycle that bhajan 3 or 4 times before I reach there? And what I feel is that the tools that you use to engage with this kind of thinking about space and time are extremely important. So I see that both in your plan and this slide that you have on right now, you're trying to capture that notion of time and what is the richness of experience of that time, right? Whether that would feel like a whole lifetime if I start walking from India Gate to the Jamuna, or will it pass very quickly? And I'm treating this more as a conversation. So in fact, sometime back I was also discussing in a very different context in our studio, what happens when you start making collages or even start drawing plans, and how much time does it take for the eye to move from one end of the plan to the other? And therefore, if one had to actually design thinking of time, how would one start drawing up this entire process? How would one draw the design? And that to me is a fascinating dimension of the project. So I felt that, for example, if I were to draw the same thing at 1:500 scale, it will just take me 2 to 5 minutes to draw that entire 4-5 kilometer stretch. If I draw the same thing the way you have drawn it, but as a collage on only one sheet of paper, in some ways you are flattening that 45 minutes. You are sort of compressing that 45 minutes so that as a viewer I can look at it as one view. And I'm really intrigued by this. I mean, I would really like to discuss how would we go about designing something which is where temporality is the primary thing that we are looking at, and not the spatiality of it. Okay? And I would also like to add, this is not from the perspective of quantifying it. So to me, the 45 minutes as 45 is not important. So I want to make a distinction between quantification and measure, that both in space and time as architects, when we are committing to something, we need a sense of measure. The measure could be bodily, in terms of body length, arm length. It could also be in terms of number of songs, right? That I'm listening to when I'm on this path. Yeah, so, but I would request the others also to sort of have a conversation, because I don't think this is, I don't have any questions as such for you as to why you did this or why you didn't do this. But I just think that this is another opportunity to reflect on what we have done and ask ourselves, how did you do it, and whether there could be more imaginations of it. Sudipto, Riyaz, I thought it would be better if he start talking.
Absolutely.
Maybe this screen sharing could be stopped so that we can see each other a little better. Yeah, slightly better at least. Yeah. No, Kashi, it's a very important point. How do we get a feel for time, but our tool is spatial. So there are some things which might help. If one is that if you're thinking of the human being who is walking from the gate to the river is one person. But there are also human beings who are distributed over the land, and they will organize themselves in different ways. For example, if you have a market, some waste will be produced, and a market will have to organize itself to be cleaned and refreshed every day. And there will be markers of such agreements between these people, which will be another cycle of time. So there will be, the space will be built out of the ways in which people organize their time. So you've got the walker's time, you've got the market person's time, you have got the time of those who are renewing that space from day to day. And if those things are there, then it is no longer possible to have only a collage, but it becomes necessary to mark in more detail the kind of dimensions that each of these people will work with. And I think that would make the plan far stronger. There is also the amount of time that you will need to move that much earth and to grow the things that you are growing. And again, there will be people involved. If you're not mechanizing the whole process and doing it in a month, bringing earth movers and so on. If you are doing it as something that is happening, constantly there are people who are taking care that the mud which slid down is put back and it is maintained in a certain way, and you are growing plants on it so that it holds, and on and on and on. These are all, so what happens is that in our concern with the human relationships, which is what your core values talked about. It talked about justice, it talked about the stimulus that a space can give, such matters. The material phenomena do not get enough attention there. And I think the same project done from a different lens of materiality. And by materiality, I don't mean our contemporary notion that, you think of materials. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the solidity of the world. If that is taken into account and human beings are then working into it, then you will get a texture to the plan, which at present it remains two kinds of things. One is landform and the other is nodes at which activities are identified. But it doesn't become a texture through which the person is moving. And if that happens, then your project with all its, the concepts become really visible. And I think that is where I would say Kashi's question is a very important question.
Actually, I mean, my sense is a little bit, my sense is that both the group, that is the Kotla group, and in some sense, the manner in which you said it, though I think there's a different part to it, still are talking about speed, still are talking about spatial displacements in time, and may not be measured in the conventional sense of with a clock, maybe with music, but there's still interval. And I think the question of interval is really important in the way that we think about it when we draw. And I'll relate it more like through an anecdote. Sarosh might remember this when we were working on the Wardha University. We had a 2-kilometer long site on a hill. And the question was how to get a sense of the scale of that. And I remember we overlaid and found that the central road, that is Gandhi Road, if you took it from Bhadra, that is, and this is just for people who don't know Ahmedabad that well, but from Bhadra all the way to Kalupur railway station was approximately the size of our site. And I remember we came back from Wardha having walked the hill, and having, for studio or something, we were walking the old city, and the sense of time was completely different. And it had nothing to do with interval. We probably took about 45 minutes or an hour to do both, but the sense of attention and interval, at what were the markers of the sense of time in space that allowed you to experience it, whether it was a person, whether it was a chai stall, whether it was a kind of I don't know. I mean, you get what I'm saying. And I'm saying, you know, we also talk about this on, let's say, walking on SG Highway versus walking even now on CG Road, which earlier you perhaps used as an example where it was a different kind of street. And the sense of time is also located in this internal perception of interval. And one's associations that one has with that place. So, I mean, I'm saying that if one is talking about time, I think that dimension, rather than it being only a kind of issue of displacement, is another aspect that one might want to kind of look at. In which case, my question to the group would be, what should be the longest ramp that you have before you take a turn? And what should I kind of experience on that route, and at what kind of interval, and so on and so forth. So I think that it's also a question of how one textures that space and what one populates it or inhabits it with, as the word they used.
I think that to add more activities, or to add more possibility of activities, we were trying to keep the ramp shorter so that you have a different slope coming every time. So, you know, you can have say the watchtower, which is at a lower slope, which goes above, but the chai wala above is just small. So you take that advantage of the slope, but in the process and with the idea of the slope getting into the market, we ended up with only 2 turns and 1 curved thing which goes on till the market. But yeah, and also in terms of space,
We also
yeah, go on.
we also added various slopes to the entire ramp, and the way the journey would be slowed down and sped up, or at various junctures where we would give various vistas for a person to see across the thing. But adding textures in the terms of adding a lot of activities maybe didn't come out through the presentation, but although we discussed a lot in terms of various kind of things which we wanted the thing. So we agreed to the point of the texture adding to the notion of time. Yes, and this aspect of interval is a very important aspect, as you say, in rather than looking at it as a time as a point of displacement, but looking at it in the sense of intervals, and at that intervals, what does the person experience in terms of the journey. So like a 2 kilometer can be moved across even in 15 minutes or across, 1.5 hours, depending on the intervals, as you rightly put it there.
I'm going to add another angle. So when I think of a journey, I am mostly interested in when am I making this journey? And to me, this journey that you've described is almost like an ancient journey. It's a journey which I have made many times through time. It's a journey that I would like to make in the city, which I'm no longer able to make. And in that sense, it holds a memory. It holds a lamentation. It holds a sense of loss. And in that sense, I feel that, it having a beginning and an end from India Gate to the Yamuna is somewhat a limit to my understanding of this journey through the city in time. And I feel that it's an archetypal kind of a situation where I really want to be a person who's making this journey, and that person is a universal person. It's a person who's not necessarily a person from the city or anyone, but it's a journey that one kind of makes alone and reaches a point where there is a community of activity, and you meet people, and then you are again walking alone, and that ramp is a section which kind of extends that sense of loneliness, perhaps, until you again meet at a node where you are again not that lonely anymore. So it's in some ways it's a description of life to me, and I think in that sense, my understanding of time for this journey would be from a different point. So no question again, it's just I'm adding to the conversation that Vishwanath started.
Shilpa, you're muted, sorry.
Yeah, is that if we could look at time, because we tend to look at time as something which is, I mean, very much we do kind of collate it with a journey, but if we could look at it beyond being linear or cyclical in the sense of material regeneration and things like that, and look at the idea of the simultaneity of time, that the idea that there is synchronicity, there is multiple things happening at the same time also, right? So there is it's not like so you don't think of things as just an experience through time, but experience inner this thing. So it's also like you think of that, instead of looking at just a person going from one point to another in a particular, so like what I think earlier people have said, that it needn't be one person who's just walking straight by, right? They might encounter something which might extend their sense of time, kind of compress it at different points of views, but there are also other creatures and other things that are actually making the journey in that sense. Yeah, and I'm wondering if one were to think of it as like layered at the same time, multiple worlds kind of layered at the same time, in a sense where it might get more denser rather than becoming I mean, I'm just saying it can add more richness to it, further, rather than think of it as a linear. So there will be like so all these actually earlier ideas would come together as to what are the people doing, what are the kind of processes that are existing at that time, at that particular time. So it's almost like you take a slice of time and kind of look at the simultaneous things happening there, rather than just look at it as a singular movement. So I'm just wondering whether that might just kind of add more, could possibly add more.
From the conversation reminds me of Tirupati quite a bit. I don't know if you guys have been there. To go into the Sanctum Sanctorum, you wait almost for 24 hours. And sometimes we've waited longer too. And then when you go in there, they say Jargandi, 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 which means like move, 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 move. And it's such an intense experience that is actually equal to that 24 hours. You'll be there for a minute or two, and then you have that direct connection. You have the whole weight of the day on you. Weight both in WAIT and WEIGHT. And and it's fantastic when you walk out. Those 2 minutes are equal to those 24 hours, and it's a fantastically spiritual experience, the way time is shortened and expanded. And in that sense, it's truly like you've been to the heaven and back kind of an experience. It reminds me when you explain that, it's such a beautiful thing that, and the city allows it, the temple allows that whole experience to happen. And I'm not sure if others have been to Tirupati and experienced this. I think it's just reminded me of that.
I think one of the interesting ways is sorry, Professor Chaya?
I was just about to say that their earlier sketches showed a lot of lines going across. There wasn't one line, and that's maybe what Shilpa is also implying. Yes.
There's just one again parallel which one could use is like the way you say program a museum, right? Like when you're walking into a museum, you typically have like a 45-minute journey, which is for people who should just need to see the highlights and then leave. And then you have a slightly more invested journey for someone who's going to spend 2 hours. So then they will see some of the other exhibits that are not on the fast track. And then you'll have the day or the 2 day or the 1 week kind of experience, which is for the scholars and the, essentially the lovers of history and people who want to completely immerse themselves. So I think even within the same kind of thing, because you'll have people who are, just on their way to work, or they're taking a shortcut for somewhere which is purely transactional in terms of their relationship with that terrain. And then you will have people who are, spending the day on that thing. So, I mean, I guess one way to program it would be to have something for everyone, where you have the possibility of navigating it in a fast track way, and you still have value from that. Because you'll be choosing this form of navigation over 2-3 other forms that are available to you, and then you add a richness to each of those. You should be able to have a day picnic on the space, and then what is that experience? Where do you propose those people will hang out? Would they be closer to the fort walls? And I guess in that, then you'll see a thickening and thinning of your of the plan as well. So I think if you just populate like a bunch of personas, like 25 different people from different backgrounds, I mean, not even people, they could be like, sentient beings. So, these sort of 25 different consciousnesses are kind of, navigating this terrain, and where would you feel they would accumulate, and where would they find meaning in that journey, for example?
There's something
Go ahead.
Yeah, sorry. It just occurred to me that the central vista, I imagine it as a space in which there is a marching rhythm,
Yeah.
Boom, 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 boom. And everything there will have to be like that. Whereas this path will have to have a sort of a bird-like movement, which will be like, and then pop up, and then again it will have something else. And it is a very interesting contrast. Now I'm thinking that maybe I should simply look at it as a contrasted movement. And it's a very, potentially, it's something that can sharpen up the design superbly.
I think one of the underlying reasons or factors was this, which hasn't come out, but I remember that we had this doubt that why are we building on this site or whichever sites which are offered, and the answer was that it's too, so if there's something happening in the central vista, you're not going to do something over there, but then you make the other site the way you want it, or maybe more humble. So I think,
Professor, it's sorry, go ahead. No. Finish your point.
So for when we had the fort wall and then the ramp which complements the scale of the fort wall, one of the subconscious things was that you have an intimidating scale here as well, but you experience that scale without being intimidated, which is not happening on the other side. So this probably not come out well, but yeah, this was something which was going on subconsciously. But since it was subconscious, it didn't come out probably.
So that's what you just said is actually really super powerful. And so to Professor Chaya's chi, like, you know, the idea of the bird, but maybe the bird can also sort of inform the march, right? Like I can imagine that there might be things that can happen, a certain politics around the Purana Killa that can, in a sense, counter or reorder even the central vista. But I wanted to say something slightly different and more perhaps a point of pedagogy than what you have done, because I think what you know, you've generated a great conversation with your project. But I would be wary of these kind of analogy driven projects, you know, so somehow it's all about journey and time, and then you sort of just kind of mine the word journey and mine the word time for what you get out of it. Because I feel like there is also the capacity in your project to reconsider much broader questions around temporality, which some get a little bit sort of lost in this, like, which I think the questions raised are very valid by everyone in the panel, but sort of asking, is it one path, several paths? Is it about simultaneity? Absolutely, and it should be about all of these things. But I'm also care about questions of temporality that are not about journey or about this idea of experience. Because I think that experience has been somehow the obsession of design for the past, I don't know, 50 plus years, right? We were kind of obsessed with this notion of creating design that is based on experience, but it is also one of process.
30
right?
years.
So
not 50 years, 30 years.
30 years. But it is very much also about organizing process, organizing how materials flow through your site, how the site enables another kind of politics, right? And I think that goes to your point, Bansi, what you just said about the fact that you don't feel intimidated. But what does that mean when you don't feel intimidated on that path, or when you don't feel intimidated in that space? It means another kind of politics is possible. And I feel that in the hurry to sort of, or in the desire to think about what is this journey doing, how is time orchestrated, which are important questions. I think for me, the bigger question is, what is another form of politics that the space opens up? And therefore, my original question about what are really the kind of events that this site would privilege, as opposed to the dumb. I love this kind of thing, because it does communicate the sense of what the Central Vista is doing. So, you know, what kind of politics, what sort of liberation is made possible when one thinks about temporality in this kind of more procedural way that encompasses multiple things and is beyond just a sense of experience.
I can just add to that, Sarosh. I think in a way experience becomes a trap, because, you know, experience is in a way all about voyeurism in some sense, and it detaches you from getting involved in what is happening around you. I mean, and actually more than 30 years, 50 years, I would say it's probably 150 years. It's a modern man, right? And it's usually, it's like with, you know, Baudelaire and this whole experience, this voyeurism and this idea of, you know, this journey and what you see in a way, you know, somehow you're privileging that thing rather than aspects which are there, you know, which are like processes which are happening around there, right? So I think I don't know if that's kind of
absolutely, I would agree with you. Yes,
we didn't like I get your question, and I mean it makes a lot of sense, but we probably didn't look at it as a potential for a different system which plays over there, or a different politics which can generate over there. But I don't know if this answers your question. But so one of the earlier discussions which we had, even while looking at the core values, was that we don't want to get into the past, nor do we want to get into the future. What we want to do is to extend the present. So that was probably why we got into the experiences and activities. And I mean, the extension of presence depends on whoever's traveling through. I mean, if you're probably listening to a song, you might just travel through at the pace of what you're listening to. Or if you're just traveling through without anything in your ears, you engage more. So I
But
think
there are other, I
We had
understand, but there
to
might be
add
other,
here.
go
Yeah.
ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, go ahead, Saresh.
I was just saying that there might be other ways of thinking about the extensions of the present, because extensions of the present also mean thinking about the presence as one that is a lived moment in time with the pollution that the Yamuna has, right? So there is a kind of like the idea of making do with what one has is a different thing than journey, right? So for like living with the presence is a different sort of immersion than one of experience and journey.
When we had started off this thing, we had also looked at the aspect of this alter ego taking the aspect of what the city of Delhi is leaving behind, and we using it as like the balance material or what the remainder. So we had taken off it, at one stance of, looking at this place would be made of only continuous reused materials, and we had taken off like whatever the as we went along, we looked at, Adobe and that, but so maybe if we would had looked at that aspect of it in a more deeper sense, maybe the other form of liberation from the other aspect of politics, or what is the other politics which is emerging out of this side, where this is using the remainder of what Delhi is sending us, and we continuing to use it as the present, would have come out. Now that aspect we drifted at one point to come to this. So it was kind of a mixed bag of things which we went through.
Actually, you were going to
Yeah.
say something in the middle.
No, so yes. Well, so one question that has been sort of going on in my mind for some time. So it's not this presentation specific, but because you are talking of time, is that I'm really interested that when you are actually drawing, whatever your designs are, uh, we talk a lot about scale, spatial scale, and we have developed tools of 1:100 scale, 1:1000 scale. So we are able to scale space. But if the architecture we make is going to last 50, 100 years, how in the act of designing are we scaling time? That I have to imagine a life that is going to last 100 years and I am making that drawing in 5 minutes. How am I drawing and what am I thinking when I'm drawing, which allows me to not sort of capture, because you cannot capture, but at least open up the whole Pandora of time in the very act of drawing. Because otherwise what happens and what I have noticed also a lot of time is that we are able to talk about it, but when we actually make the plan or the drawing, we fall back into tried and tested methods of the way we draw a plan. And so there is a big disjunct between what we talk and what we draw. So it's just a question that has been sort of playing on my mind for quite some time now.
It's been playing on our minds also, because one of the problems which we faced was that when we started putting down our thoughts on paper, it looked so bleak that we struggled to make it like more interactive or engaging, because again we fall back on our the ways we usually draw. So that is something which we actually struggled with, as to how to put it forth the way we are visualizing it or the way we are discussing it, and not as a flat plan or a flat section.
I think that is what, like our plan with the path from the India Gate to Yamuna. I think that that was like an oversimplification of what we had thought, and that's why it's sort of coming out as we're envisioning that, you know, one person is walking the entire distance. But actually what we had in mind was that you know, like passerbys, everyday people, you know, like use the place as part of their errands also. It's not like the ceremonial walk that you have to do as a tourist or a visitor. So I think that got lost in translation in our drawing.
There may be some clues in the way drawing happens in comic books and graphic novels, right? Like what's really interesting is there, because they play a lot with time in terms of the panel layouts, and you know, on every page you could have the same instant, but it's explored from different people's points of view. I mean, there's some really amazing work in there, and I mean, then in that sense, then architecture and context is viewed as backdrop, not so much a bird's eye perspective, but it's like, you know, I mean, you'll view it in relation to activities and like, I mean, I read a lot of Batman, so I think, you know, just in this, there's a lot of explorations of, you know, when he loses his parents, you know, there's some beautiful, like, you know, double spreads of just pearls dropping, you know, from his mother's necklace. So there are these, like, you know, very, very evocative kind of references to time. But, and if you spend time on that spread, like, you will open up that spread and you probably spend like, you know, maybe 30, 40 seconds on an activity that in real time has taken maybe less than a second for those pearls to fall down. You know? So, I mean, I think there are maybe some clues to be drawn from the way you expand and contract time in a comic book.
I don't want to continue too long, but just a thought in relation to what Kashi said. Our tools used to give us different degrees of damage to the paper. If you draw with a 4H versus you draw with a charcoal. And so our process used to be first draw very softly with a soft pencil or charcoal, and it becomes harder and harder and harder. And then if you have to rub, in the old days, we used to have to make the same working drawing because we couldn't draw the whole thing again. So we had to rub out. And there would be still something on the paper which held that. And it was so difficult, and it made you feel really bad if you had to change something. In an ink drawing, that was even more, because you used to have to use a blade. And if you didn't know how to do blading, then your paper would tear. And so this thing was registered in the paper and the material of drawing itself. Now today, you can draw and erase, fat, gone. And that is something which I find a big, something I'm missing if I use the digital technology. I don't know, probably the young people will find ways of overcoming that, or they may already have found it. But to me, that tangible drawing process did something.
So incidentally, both on Miro board and concept board, because studios are now conducted on Miro board, you can play the history. So even if someone erases, you can rewind and see what that person has done and not done. And so I've been increasingly discussing this, that I'm interested in how much you redraw over the same thing. Like sometimes you're thinking something, so you draw over the same plan again and again because your mind is dwelling on it. And then some things you draw really fast. And so I agree that I find AutoCAD as a software very different, although sketching on Miro board with a stylus or a pencil is slightly different. Because in AutoCAD, you just give a command of the whole line. The hand does not have to traverse. But on Miro board, if you're sketching, your hand has to traverse that distance. And that takes time. But you're right, it's very interesting to look at these different softwares and what they do to the act of drawing.
think this has been a wonderful conversation, and we will have to move on to the next group. Otherwise, dinner time might not come. So on that note, may I ask the next group to please start your presentation. That is, the next one is
Merrolese.
Merrolese, please.
Can I share the screen? Yes. So this is actually the first exercise where we would like to start from, which was about inhabiting time in a way, and we had a very different way of looking at it. So the one of the core ideas where it started from was about seeing the Yamuna as a mother, who is giving a birth to that city, the Delhi, the place Delhi, and the Delhi acting as a child of her. Apart from that, there were this other ideas also from the fellow group mates, was about having after the birth, having this place has a community of trees and a community of biodiversity acting in living together in that particular place. And also there were also the layers of it, where one was talking about the layers, like the city that is happening above the ground and the city that is happening below the ground. And also that was the overall notion of this, which was actually leading us mainly to the idea of a very biocentric world that we were imagining it to be. So I think this was like the first thing that we explored. I think we can move to the next slide, Ayush. If you guys want to add anything to this.
Yeah. So basically, in that particular exercise, we came up with so these were all individual ideas which we pieced together, and we all found a common link between all of us, and that was the idea of harmony with nature. And over here, what we did was we distributed points to, we took some time to understand what are our priorities if we were to imagine a world like that. And so we came up with ideas of harmony, of all forms of life being equal, that authority would not be based upon power, but more about responsibility. We would not be indulgent when it especially came to resources and luxuries. And how could a symbiotic relationship between each organism really work? And another interesting concept was the circular system of resources. So this is something that we all as a team learned, wherein there is approach of cradle to cradle. Any resource that you take, how will you return it back in whichever form if possible? So this chart basically is a representation of all the ideas, wherein we're trying to understand how could we create an equal platform for everyone, and what kind of a world would we like to imagine. Yeah, right. We can move on to the next. Ayush, next slide.
Yeah. So after we all discuss and we have all these core values, we share it and the Kotla group. I think we all were amazed of how they reinterpreted all our core values. Like they actually engage with them, and they I don't know how to explain it, but I think they really understood what we were trying to convey, like the importance with nature and the path of life. And I think they pay more attention to all the migrants and nomadism. Like we are all moving into the city, and in Delhi that no one is there are original people of New Delhi, but there are still a lot of migrants, and all these timelessness of the city. So they did this amazing section where they put like all the activities and all like the places of pausing spaces or contemplation spaces that are actually needed into the city. And we thought that they were like connecting with all our core values. That's why from there we took like all our like initial point to finish all our like the proposal at the end. So we did this like we pay attention to the notes, and that's where I just will explain later. But yeah, so it was like a connection. We feel it like our core values that were like from the first exercise about nature and about like think of the other will like work together in the last exercise. Yeah.
So like from this section, actually, we were able to like basically come up with this place which is for reflection, repose, rejuvenation, and recreation. And the section actually suggested us that because of the activities that are happening, when at some point there is this marketplace that is there, and along with that there is this one node near the river where there are this wetlands and the cleaning of the river is happening, and also like there are this performance spaces inside in this section where actually the cultural activities are taking place. And then there are in between there is this pause points where actually when which is more sort of that we perceived it as a place where anything can happen. So yeah, and I think we can move to the next slide.
I'd just like to add that in this section, one thing that was very important to us was the idea of water. And through the process, although it came in much later, but through the process, we have recognized as water as a main spine of the design that we took forward into all our design processes and even the proposal at large. So with that, with all these activities that we had mentioned, as Jana mentioned, and we came up with this idea of the water as the thread, and we were looking at ways of bringing in water and then sort of taking it back to the river in a cyclical process, such that there is a cause of cleaning the water in some sense, and then we also connect all these functions or all these activities through these lines of water. And so I just run through the plan, and I will start explaining what we have done here. So at the node of this is where the water begins to get inside, and this is the Ferris wheel or the pulley system of kind of a machinery, which brings in the water into the lines. So there's actually no, this is like a constructed rivulet of sorts, but we are bringing it through the aqueduct into the first wetland, which is already present there. So through this process, we bring in the water first to the wetlands, and then there are a series of wetlands that happen before they empty out into the existing lake here. And so as the water passes from one wetland to the other wetland, there is a sort of natural cleaning process that's happening. And before it reaches the lake, which is the cleanest part of the water here. And through that, we have the structure that you see here is the bath, the hammam, or the hammam, that's how we got inspired from. And that's the public plug, which is close to the existing public swimming pool that is there. And from there, we'll get into the details of each of these. But a brief idea would be that there are two water bodies within the hammam itself, where one is where the water from the lake empties into it. And then from there, once it is being used by the people and all of that, it empties out into another smaller area, which is now a sort of a slightly dirtier water, but still cleaner than what it came in as. And then it is like taken back to the river through the existing drain and all. And then there is the basilica, what we call the basilica. It is supposed to be the interpretation of the existing nursery, and there are the markets which we directly got from the section that we had received from the other group. And we have interspersed these areas with small pavilions of pause, the places of nothingness that Rana was talking about. And to cater to the cultural needs, we have placed a smaller amphitheater here. And the largest structure that you see here is one of the more interesting structures. However, the group members who had come up with this is not here today, but this is an interesting idea, as this was his personal response to what is happening in the Central Vista right now. So he came up with this idea of having a Karigar Basti, which is for the workers of the Central Vista. So he made this into a sort of a temporal structure, which can be used by the workers of the Central Vista who will be building the Vista. And he's also lined it up with a small, I'm sorry, not a small, but lined it up with a sort of temporary market also, which he called the Shramayana. Yeah. So yeah, so this is how we came on. So basically the water becomes the spine of all these functions, and around the water we have placed all our functions and activities.
इसका कि speed post has been moved.
Yeah. So, and this is the water cycle that we are.
Yeah. So what we did actually was we needed to have a device, a tool actually to take the water and to place to like take it to this aqueducts from where it can enter this lake, which is actually existing in the zoo, and we are converting it into a wetlands basically. So what we did so what we did exactly was that we actually like thrived back to the exercise tool that we did, and we thought about a practice that happens on everyday basis, and how it can be converted into and connected through a tool. So we actually took a exercise the practice of exercising every day, and we came up with this idea of this gym. Which is actually connected to this police system in the near the river, and this gym is actually placed like facing the river, nearby the river, and all of the equipments are basically connected with the gear systems and are acting to so any of the instruments that that is getting worked out, the pulley actually starts working and moving and drawing the water from the river to the aqueducts. So the first part of this whole water system was bringing the water to the aqueducts. From there, actually from the aqueducts, now the water of the river Yamuna is actually polluted water. So how we can clean it up? So what we thought about was that there is this structure which actually came up from the idea of this water filter straws, and we actually looked at the layers of that filter straw, and from the aqueduct the water actually falls on this structure, and there are these three different layers that it goes through. So like the first three parts, the first three stories are the membrane filters, and then there is this iodine crystal filter for the next two layers, and then finally it's a charcoal filter at the bottom, and from where it enters the wetland. So wetland, actually what a wetland does is that it actually cleans the water more and also adds necessary minerals to it, and because of the plants and everything, and it acts as a place for the biodiversity to come up and to have a dialogue between them in that place. And actually this place is geographically located near the zoo that is already there, and so actually we designed this system in a way, and then from where it enters the lake, which has a very clean water in a sense, which can be used for bathing purposes, and we can take the water from that channel, the water from them to the hammams, making it a part of everyday life. So I think we can move to the next slide, Ayush.
Yeah.
So what we did actually was that there was this area where there was this existing swimming pool, and we were always we had this notion of going back to the things, going back in time and looking at the things. So like the hammam, idea of hammam as a place where one engages with water came from there, and we converted it into a form of a public bath. And what we did actually was that there was this fragments of baths, and these are actually submerged inside the ground in a way. So if you see on the right hand side in the basement plan, it is actually a basement plan. So from where there is this there are these two water bodies, and then there are this baths that are there. So actually the first water body on the right hand side is the water body carrying the clean water, and the water body on the left hand side is the water body that takes the water from all of the baths again from there to the and connect it through a piping system to an existing drain. So that's how we looked at it. And so if you see on the ground floor plan, there is this water channel that is being inserted from the lake, and these are what we thought about it. These baths can be actually like some of them it can be open, and some of them it can be closed spaces. And also there was this idea of temporarity and also the roughness of the material. So we were actually we actually came up with a material of making these baths from mud, and actually making a foundation of a stone which can hold water in a way, and the mud starts getting like eroded because of this, and the whole superstructure is actually mud, and the platforms that are created above actually acts as a place where the festivals can happen. So like this whole place was imagined in such a way. So like during festivals, there can be this temporary structures. The shamianas can be put up, or like if we say the mandaps can be put up over there, and the ceremonies can happen above that. And so we thought about it as such a place. And yeah, I think that we can move to the next one.
So this is the basilica, the nursery that we saw. There is an existing nursery on the site, and for this we went through a little bit of a process. So if you can see the plans over here, so these are. So basically, we were just looking at the different scales and how can we engage with this space, with the ideas that we had, and how do we incorporate all these activities that were given to us, or we interpreted them in a certain manner. So one day we were just looking at all these different plans of the Roman Basilica Forum and the Nalanda University and everything. And we started out by this little process where we just started by placing the Roman Basilica over here, and then the Nalanda Basilica, which responded to the site in a way that it occupied the site in a way that there was some sort of open space that created between the fort wall and the structure that we were designing. And then we started playing with it, and we started reducing it further, and we deducted it, and we're just trying to adapt it to the site and the functions that we were playing with. And initially, we were also looking at the Basilica as a marketplace. So the Colonnade became the entire marketplace, but through a series of discussions, we realized that it was too huge a scale, and we realized that probably it would suit something else better than the marketplace itself. And through a lot of process, we came up to this part where the amphitheater is carved inside. Sorry, the amphitheater is carved inside the fort wall, and the basilica now turns into a nursery. So we've repeated the columns that were already there, and we've reinterpreted the entire architecture of basilica in our own ways to give it a new, different form. So one of the things that was happening before was we were trying too hard to make it look like the basilica, because we initially started with that. But with discussions, we realized that it was not necessary to probably stick to that idea, and we tried to break free from that, the constraint of the architecture itself. And so these large columns, which are, by the way, 3 meters in diameter, have been seen as like places for local species, the native species. And there are 2 markets that flank the Basilica. And of course, so we've interspersed that with these pavilions of pause where there's no activity to happen, there's no activity determined.
Also, like in the
Yeah.
program, there was this idea of that we received from the Kotla team. There was this idea of a place for biodiversity, and we were actually able to look at the previous lectures that we had, and where this question about this native trees. So, like we thought about it. What if we turn this nursery into a way that it becomes a display of this native trees, and the native trees of the Delhi holds a higher position in that, and all the other trees are actually lying on the land, and that's why we came with this ideas of this columns holding the trees, and one can actually climb the columns, and it becomes a place where the monkeys can enjoy, and like other biodiversities can also come up, but it acts as a nursery or a display of this local species that are there. And the plan of the scales of the Nalanda University that we took up was actually, we thought of it to be like a permanent market in that area. So like people can go to this markets, and then this basilica is acting as a this nursery is acting as a center in between them, and like this becomes a place for rest, and also these post pavilions that are there. So that's how we thought of this whole place. Yes.
Rana, you're
yes,
going
sir.
to have to move a little bit faster. You're already over your 20 minutes, and
Yes,
you've
sir.
still got some time to go. Okay.
Yes, sir. Sure, sure.
And well, these are just the details of the pavilion plans that we were looking at, and how they could be repeated and rearranged along the entire site that we are trying to work on. And this is the section where we are imagining different activities that happen throughout the day, and it's not just limited to the humans. Yeah.
Yeah. I just a second. Yeah.
Yeah.
So amidst all the activity that is taking place, we've tried to create this space of nothingness, which Geraldine will explain now. Yeah. Geraldine, are you there?
Oh yeah, sorry. I was talking, but my mic was off. I'm so sorry. So yeah, we were like, all the project has we think of different scales of how to incorporate throughout all the site. I'm beginning. Can you go back to the last?
Yeah.
So we were thinking of modules of different scales. Like, for example, this one that is 8 by 8, no? And it could be like put it into different parts of the site as a unique model, or it can be positioned with the other kind of model, and it will create a bigger space to create different kind of interaction within the space, but also with kind of activities that could be into it, because like the basilica and the water let's say interventions are like these huge interventions, but these models can be in the in-betweens of these spaces. No, so there could be like a place to pause, a place to have a chai while you're walking through the city, a place where you can, like, women can go and do some talking or embroidery, or just to gather with some friends. And like, these are the dispositions of the different models, with a space also in between them, no, like a pause between the different models. And the next, maybe Shreya.
So in the next section, this is just a visual representation of how an ideal usage of these pause pavilions would be. We would really allow nature to take its course, and as you can see, like, we're trying to bring all life forms in because we didn't want to create like a char diwari, because the minute we create 4 walls, we are kind of delineating the space, which is also happening in a way over here. But we're trying to limit the idea of infrastructure taking over space, and trying to allow people to really make the space there. Right.
Yeah. Next. Also thinking of the security of women. Sorry, Shreya. Sorry.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, like also thinking like all like unsafe places for women and kids and all that, like to be open, just to so everyone can be itself and do a lot of activities within it, and not only humans but also all kind of animals and species going into there. Yeah, sorry.
Next slide. The next 3 slides, I think I will be able to explain quickly. So these are actually the temporary markets. So we thought about one of our fellow groupmates was thinking about this markets, temporary markets that would set up for about like once or twice a year, and like it would sell a lot of other goods from around the country, and so these were the pavilions. These were actually the temporary structures in a way that would occupy the site for some period of time. There were 3 interpretations to this. So one was the temporary structures that would become the market. The second would be the Ayush. Can go to the next slide. Yeah. Yeah, where the scaffoldings actually becomes the public place and the platforms for playing basically, and and then the third was the thought of this whole Karigar Basti, where the people would actually the Karigars of the central vista would come up, and the whole project has been estimated for about 21 months and occupying this whole land in forms of temporary structures and this tamboos, and then they are residing inside there. So like there were these 3 parts to this structure. So like that is how our whole thing is connected. Anyway.
Okay, are you guys done?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Thank you.
Yes. Okay, so maybe you can stop sharing and we can get into conversation discussion mode.
So I don't know whether it's just the final presentation or not, but I always think as architects we have a lot of trouble drawing water or dealing with water when especially we are making plans, because plans by their very nature tend to sort of, I mean, the way we draw water is we have to draw the outline of where the water ends and where the line begins. And you know, in that very first plan of yours, the entire site plan where you were showing those 2 channels. So when I was looking at that, I was wondering, like, you know, how do we look at these channels throughout seasons, in heavy rain, in peak summer, and so on. So I'm wondering whether you need a very different way of imagining water when you're especially dealing with it and want to integrate it with some architectural decisions. I know it is difficult, but somehow, so that's why I'm still wondering whether it's just that in the final drawing you had to draw something and therefore it became the way it is, or how were you? So in fact, I was looking back at, say, how Pankaj Gupta was talking about water in terms of graphs and numbers and all that. On the other hand, Vishwanath was talking about water in a very different sort of way. So I'm just wondering how you dealt with it.
I guess it was more about how Anthony Ashwata was talking about like this water machine, and so like even if we have shown this water in a way that it enters and stuff, but the outlines, actually we haven't drawn the outlines to it. It is like there is this blue thing which gets merged with the green thing, and that is how actually we thought about it to be. So
And in one of our previous exercises, we had drawn the cycle, like a 24 cycle of how the river edge would really be, wherein we've kind of shown, like in an animation, how water would really take over and come back, and our structures would still kind of create a certain space, and how people would kind of use that ghat region as well. So even for us, water has been a kind of a kind of dynamic entity. But for representation, this is what we've done. Yeah.
You know, there is a fascination, a childlike fascination with the toys. Engineering is basically comes from the childlike desire to change reality. So the water will have to go. So therefore, you will have to have people doing their exercise, and it will go up, and then the thing, and it's a very but at the same time, it has done much damage to the world. This, what Shilpa talked about as 150 years, maybe 500 years of this has happened. Of making toys, thinking that we will change the world forever. One toy after another. And there is a fun element to it which one can appreciate as a kind of a youthful energy of doing something, which I can take. But it requires also a little bit more thought. Are we to change processes, or are we to participate in processes? And I think this is where the difference would be. Because the water would normally flow from the upper level to a lower level, from the city to the river. And when we reverse it, it is a very, very fascinating thing, and all humans will be fascinated till something happens. I think that has to be considered.
And I was also, yes, I completely agree that toying with water is a very dangerous thing. But I was also seeing from the perspective of, as an architect, as a professional, what is the rigor with which we approach a question like water? Like, even if I have to, for a moment, indulge in this, you know, someone is cycling and driving up the water, I'm really interested in knowing how many people have to cycle simultaneously in order to drive that water up that distance, you know. So in that sense, how do we transition from that first sort of imaginary idea into something which is the next step of thinking about design? Sometimes you have to think about something extremely poetic, but at times you have to maybe do number crunching, or you have to look at maybe things that have been done in the past, like the water wheel, for example. I don't know. So what are the various sort of knowledges we bring into play once we start with an idea? That to me, of course, in the final presentation, you're only showing what you have arrived at, but I'm really interested in how you arrived at this, both the water features that you have, you know, that cycling and also the water purification fountain sort of thing.
Actually, we were, it came through a few discussions in between, and which were about, like, what we were doing is that we were actually placing a huge Ferris wheel, and to draw the water to the aqueducts, and because we have to bring the water, and the actual geography won't allow it, so we need to have the aqueducts in between, and we need to get the water to some part from where we can like actually move it in a way, and it can again go back to the river. So like we were thinking of this whole cycle, but there were this discussions that came up of about having a ritual where actually people are coming over there and there is this whole gear system or something like that that has been designed in a way that people, if they move the wheels or something like that on the ground, it can actually move the overall thing, and then again go back. The water can start moving inside that. But then what we thought about it, that if it's a ritual, it happens from one particular time to till the another particular time. So like if we want to like do it on everyday basis, can it be a ritual on everyday basis? And then we were able to thought about this whole practice of where actually the Delhiites are actually going to gym every day and doing exercise, and what if we can connect that equipment over there and connect it to the pulley system so that the water drawing actually happens every day. So that's how actually we looked at it, this whole thing. Yeah.
And I think we also oh, sorry.
Go ahead.
That I think throughout all the exercises, we think of water as a user also, I think, because we were always thinking of it, of water, of soil, of animals, of different species. So I think, as you said, like we are still experimenting of representation and all that, like in the period of time that we have like to work and to think about all of this stuff. It's important to only put in mind has like water has life of itself, no, and all the seasons are different, and all like depending of the part of the study will be like the color will be different and all that. So I think it has been like a nice experimentation of how to bring into architecture soil, water, and animals and humans, and understanding a little bit. Yeah.
I'm also talking from the perspective, so I always wonder whether the kind of disasters that we see happening all around us when it comes to architecture, how much of it is because your core values itself are misplaced? That is one kind of sort of recipe for disaster. The other is the ease with which architects seem to be able to take design decisions, the speed and the ease with which those decisions are taken and then justified by any means possible. And I'm wary of both kinds of disasters, you know. So that's what I thought when I was looking at it.
You know, I'm looking at the earlier project and the current one. I'm actually a little curious. First of all, the studio itself set a site which was not the central vista. It was away from it. It was a different site. That was, that's more of a kind of a quiz for the studio faculty, not so much for the students. But the interesting thing is that a lot of times when we make counter proposals to something like the central vista, for instance, usually the thought process is what damage is this thing going to do and how do I correct that damage, or what questions has this not asked, and so I asked the other questions, the questions that were missing. So for instance, of course, Central Vista doesn't think about ecology. So, you know, I'm going to do ecological revival. Well, the Central Vista kind of doesn't have markets, doesn't have cultural spaces. So I'm going to do that. So, you know, it is a kind of a process which is in a way reacting to the Central Vista, in a way, you know, addressing things that it missed out or correcting all the damages that it has done. How do we programmatically imagine alternatives to what the Central Vista itself is doing? For instance, it is a space for political decision making. Okay, it is a space for cultural institutions. What kind of political decision making happens in this other site? What kind of cultural institutions do we create in this other site? Is that some way in which we can think about alternatives? rather than thinking about all the, correcting all the mistakes that they have made. Just a thought.
Yeah, I think, Hussain, you have a very, very, very important point. If we consider the kind of institutions, both political and cultural, that we might need, that question is gripping all of us in a certain way. And it may not be possible to straight away give the answers. The things that are missing may have some clues to the kind of institutions. And though the participants cannot express it well, I think there is one or two things here which are important. One is the consideration of human beings without power as the generators of the discussion or the conversation on this side. And I wonder, perhaps the site should have been in the middle of Madhya Pradesh or Jharkhand rather than here. Perhaps the site should have been somewhere. That is one question, I think, which is sort of eating away at my mind right now. But I think now that you opened this discussion, it is important to face it head on. Was there a kind of politeness and an inability to stand with a political standpoint in the manner in which this studio has been run? I think not. Because at least I am convinced that we do not have real idea of the kind of institutions. We do not have even sufficient knowledge of the institutions that persist in all kinds of communities all over the country. Somebody like Sabyasachi might be able to tell us some more about that. But at the moment, we don't know. And the whole country is struggling to find out. Or at least a large number of people, not whole country is chalo, cholo. But in that sense, the studio is not a solution or a running away. I will state that very clearly, that it is a kind of testing out of certain possibilities of new institutions. They have not yet crystallized. Sure, I fully agree with Kashi, with you, with everybody who would say that. But I think that I would really look at it as a procedure whereby we are looking for institutions. So, too much I have said, and I don't want to sound like I'm sort of banging you on the head for this, but I think it is really important. This is really important what you have said, and it is important that there is some clarity between us who have initiated this studio as to, and there is some clarity as to why Hussain abstained in the last week.
No, it has nothing to do with that. Nothing to do with that. I promise.
No, I mean, I'd like to just add a couple of points. I think that in some sense, having a site next to, but not constantly referring to the central vista was very important, I think. And as a studio, in what it allowed us to consider and contrast against. Okay, and I mean, I'm going to just elaborate on one point that Professor Chaya said, but the other thing that we had initially started out with was that this was not necessarily only an architectural studio. That we did have at the beginning a number of participants who were from other disciplines. Unfortunately, some of them couldn't continue. But the idea, and we had hoped, and we do hope, that Porsche in the larger frame is able to encourage people with different skills and different ways of thinking disciplinarily into this, which meant that the manner in which the studio would express itself and the explorations would happen would perhaps be different from a conventional architectural studio. Having said that, we found through the studio that a large number of, now everybody on board is largely architectural students and architects. So there was a certain amount of correction that happened, and there was, of course, there is the work of the participants themselves that pushes the work in a particular way. But a lot of our early discussions about the studio were trying to imagine what it would be like dealing with people who are not with, let's say, a drawing skill set and so on. And that has led to a certain amount of a reworking of the intent of the studio as it happened. As what Kashi was talking about, there have been ideas and concepts like those of time, which are extremely abstract, which we have really pushed the participants to engage with and kind of struggle through in order that they're able to, even at the cost of them being somewhat frivolous, playful, but to propose activities and actions that that can inhabit this site. So, I mean, I wanted to say one about the idea that it wasn't meant to be the architectural one. The second, that the proximity to the central vista was to have it as a background in which one is exploring this. And I think we can discuss that after the third group in more detail as well, if it needs to be, because I think it's an important point that Kashi has articulated also. But yeah, these were the 2 points to Professor Chaya and you.
I just say it is not about the studio process or structure itself, but the kind of thinking further from what Professor Chaya and Hussain, what you were saying, is because with both the previous project and this project, I felt that one of the reasons why I think we've not been able to engage with the political is because it's the same this thing as earlier, is that somehow we're looking at all these, we're creating spaces of consumption. You know, this whole idea of experience is about spaces of consumption, whether whatever it might be, you know, whether it is through a journey or, you know, whether it is through the bathhouse or whatever, rather than focusing on spaces of production, or, you know, the production of space in the or the other way around also, the production of space. So it's the same thing. So instead of focusing on how the production of space happens, and I know it has come through in discussions before, like when you were talking about like, you know, that how will, let's say, you know, if you're spreading biomass, then how will it actually be done, you know? I mean, that is the whole, this thing of the production of space. So although those things came out somehow, like came in the discussion somehow in a way, in the way the program is formulated, we are still talking of consuming space, you know, we just, I mean, that this thing is, it's not there of the actual actions and the processes of making, which are both the physical and the social in a sense. So
I would like you to say specifically which part of the program is about consumption.
So I mean, actually, like in the first one, very much I felt that
never in the studio, I cannot remember a single discussion which was about experience.
No, that's what I'm saying. I don't think the discussions were about that at all. In fact, I'm saying the other way around, that actually in the discussions, there was a lot of discussion on the production of space, because I remember you talking, also about like how are these things getting done. Okay, you're talking, I think that particular one, I was just looking at a video of this whole idea of, the spreading biomass and letting the jungle grow. So this idea of that, how is it really going to grow, right? So there are going to be people who are going to be doing it, and how are they going to be doing it? And so there was a whole lot of discussion on that, I think, but somehow it's kind of in the program making, it's missing, I think, and I think, I mean, if maybe that had been kind of pulled it out for, I think so the political was there very much in the discussions. So not the political in the sense of the kind of high political, but the politics of everyday life was very much there. That's what I'm trying to say, actually. So, but somehow in the final way the program coalesced, that kind of got lost, maybe just in the way of explaining it. I don't know. So.
No, in fact, I mean, what I was saying was also not really so much a comment on the studio. In fact, it was more about the comment on the outcomes of the projects. And it also comes from my experience as a teacher with many students who are doing architecture, is that there is some amount of meekness when it comes to engagement with larger political processes, though there is no meekness when it comes to spaces of leisure and spaces of, so there is a kind of a selective identification of what kind of role architecture can play, which is a little disconcerting.
Yeah, you are right. There I will fully agree with both of you. Yes.
This is part of a much broader conversation, of course, which is beyond the project per se. But I think it is important to talk about this, and maybe there are other forums and other spaces to talk about this. But I think that we are increasingly finding that the tools that as architects we need are beyond tools that are spatial, right? Like there are tools that could be about creating organizations, about managing or producing other forms of politics, right? This idea that somehow, all the students who've joined, or all the participants in Poche, that somehow this is a conversation that only remains in Poche, and it is not something that can be part of a real world polity, is I think to be challenged, and we should encourage that it can be part of a real world polity. But then if that is the case, the question is, what are the tools we as architects need? And I would argue those are beyond just tools of spatial experience, but they are much kind of more complex tools of generating our own projects somehow, creating organizations that are beyond the kind of client-driven mode of practice. So it really opens up a whole range of questions, which I think are absolutely pertinent and important for our time. I want to just say specifically to the project a few things. So in your project, I think I really like the idea of the water, of course, and also the notion of tying in various kinds of productive processes that engage with people, non-humans, and so on. But I wish that somehow, sort of, to answer some of the questions about how many people actually need to do this work, to bring in the agencies of labor, I wish you had sort of done the ritualistic on the one hand and always measure it against something like BOD, right? Biological oxygen content of water. Because then immediately there are certain kinds of, like fish can accept lower amounts of BOD. And then as you get towards more oxygenated contents, you can engage with more ecologically, thicker biodiversities. So somehow tying it both to the ritualistic on the one hand and something that is more measurable in terms of the pollution might have been, I think it would have allowed for both of these things to sort of coexist. Whereas right now it seems like the project sort of dwells upon the ritualistic, but it lacks the realm of something measurable.
Okay, I think on that note, we will move to the final group. Would you please share your screens, guys?
Just for the previous group, I must say that there seems to be a lot of joy in their project. I think there's a lot of all these different things, although they're a little, I mean, they could have been tied together better. I mean, but there's a lot of joy happening there. So that is just fun to watch it, I think, to see it.
Yes, we did have a lot of fun.
Yeah, we did actually had a lot of fun with this.
Yes, may I have a
Yes,
last
please go on.
about what Saroj just said. Well, the question of the involvement of the BOD or that, I think it's also connected with the previous comment about architects. We need to work with also all kind of scientists and all kind of from the social sciences and humanities, because we are designers at the end, and I think we need a lot broader understanding, which anthropologists, biologists, a lot of people can give us. I think we should begin to work more with all kind of scientists and professionals, so we can enrich also our practice throughout the city. And yeah, that was all that I was thinking, because it's so many things that we have to come across in every project, that it will be more enriching to work with so many other professionals. And yeah, we have a lot of fun all the time. Yeah, sorry.
Are you guys sharing screen?
So we're room Dwellakwan, and this is Re Yamuna Ration, a love story. Next page. Okay. We begin in Delhi.
Two protagonists, man and nature, fall in love and seek to build a relationship to care for each other.
Yeah, so this is about what we received from the previous group. The first image talks about the floodplains and the boundaries. The second talks about the Yamuna in return for work or a service, or Delhi as a sarai. So if we see, it talks about changing river, which connects to the cycle of nature. There's a sense of belonging. And on the other hand, there's also security and also gain for the city. So we're not talking about fortified walls or security in that sense, but there's something which benefits the city. So this also talks about empathetic model in terms of learning, and connects to the two ends of students and how empathy works. So it also describes about the learnings and the experts and the displaced communities. So the meeting of the two ends and the corners also are talked. So it's a return to the river in search of an alter ego. Next.
And so we began searching for a space for love. How can love become spatial? Next page.
And
through searching and roaming and wandering around the river banks of Yamuna.
When we arrived at our
Finally,
core values, so we started discussing from circularity, which is the idea that we adopt and respond to the rhythms of nature, to the right to experiential spaces wherein value is located at each transition of a space.
Navya, can you zoom in the image? So next, temporality, which we talk about. So architecture must maintain a changing relation with time. So how, for example, how Manik Chowk is allowing the grid to shift and the activities change according to the time. So we're trying to allow not architecture as a hard line defining a function, but allowing the things to happen naturally, and how it can the activities can change, and architecture as not is just as a backdrop, not a major role. So we're talking about temporality.
We also talk about the idea of spatial justice, that space is socially produced. It's the spatial and the social, they affect each other. And the idea of equitable distribution of of resources in space.
So about the undefined spaces, when we see a city, there's a lot of houses just next to each other, and we try to find public spaces more. But if we carefully notice, there are a lot of undefined and abandoned spaces, which somehow can be converted into a public assets. So trying to notice these spaces and converting them into public zones was also a concern for the city.
And central to our idea of intimate spaces and of the architecture that we propose is a certain kind of empathetic architecture. And speaking about how architecture serves as the backdrop for where the story takes place. But this is not just any story. This is not a mystery. It's a love story. It's a story about how people begin to care for each other. Not only how people care for each other, but how people can care for nature and how a relationship can be built. And that relationship then relates to the architecture of an ecosystem, the architecture of climate change, of the certain circumstances that we're living in now. This love story was one thing that we sought to express through the relationship between man and nature, and how as man cares for nature, nature also cares for man. And just relating it back to something that people can understand that's completely non-architectural, but completely architectural at the same time.
Yes, so when people connect to nature and we talk about affordability of living and building without disturbing the natural habitat, and also coexisting without claiming the ownership on the land. That is prioritizing public spaces over governed spaces, which is altering the Central Vista's idea of governed spaces. Also, in turn, it grants rights to non-human entities and engaging our senses beyond what's visual. And yes, that's our core values. Next slide, Navya. Okay. So after core values, it's finding one's way through the experiences, where we talk about the spatial experiences and fragmentation of built and unbuilt, the spaces of nature within this built form. So in those sketches, it's quite visible that that defining the scale of built and the unbuilt, and including nature within this space. It's more like designing the unbuilt than the built. The outside is more important than what's inside. Next.
Collaging in architecture. And so from there, realizing sort of the scale of what we wanted to build, it was important to us to define the project through permanent structures, not through temporary structures. Because I think that temporality can also be confused with temporary, whereas temporality is something that is a function of permanence. I think that the buildings have to be permanent in a way for things to pass through them, and so that the buildings don't fly away with the experience. And the Center for Learning that we're trying to build here, it was also connected to the idea that we realized that making something of oneself, allowing people to come to this learning center is a process of time. And so temporary structures don't function for these people to allow to build up their skill set, to be able to work in these workshops for a long period of time, to make connections, to form communities. And so in section, we can see the types of structures that we wanted to build, varying in different heights and playing around in cohesion with nature. And in plan, we can see, again, the fragmentation of what we wanted, really trying to focus on building in a certain scale that was relative to the very specific experience that we were providing through learning.
So as man falls in love again with the Yamuna, a next plan for caring for it comes up.
And so in the plan, the first thing that we centered the project around was the extension of the drain. As you can see on the north side of the plan, there's the previous drain. And you can see our proposed drain is, it's longer, and we extended it so that there's more time that passes from the exit of the drain back to the Yamuna. And along this extension of time that we're seeing the drain water pass through, we added filtration units that work in cohesion with the programs that surround this new drain. And so this is the way that nature is then caring for man, and also that man is caring for nature. From the filtration units, units 1 and 2, around there we can see the cord of water, which is related to the plastics and the waste that is taken from these filtration units, and then being able to be recycled through learning workshops and recycling of the material.
Yeah. Navya, can you zoom in the plan? So as we see this place, we've converted this undefined space by the river into something of a learning, resting, and working space. So where you have this entry court, and slowly when you move down, there's the first thing which comes up is the court of innocence, which talks about the process of learning and unlearning. So where in a community we cater to different age groups. So there are women, men, and children. So there are so this court is focuses on the children, and where we have classrooms around it, and with the garden. And as you move down, there are workspaces, and the court of learning happens. So so especially we had a module which we had done, which is of 10 by 10 meters. And we have placed the plan fragmented so that each activity gets a spillover space for things to happen. So there's a semi-open space to the activity, which allows the natural activities which can happen there. So as you see, the square units are the workshops, and each of them has a semi-open space for the working which happens there. And we have placed in such a way that the classrooms are between two workshops. So when a student is learning, he's not only learning inside the classroom, but also something which is happening around him. So he learns the skills which happens there. And this major courtyard acts as a chalk of a village where all of them meet, interact, and there are different age groups which are involved. And the student not only learns inside what is happening, but also interacts with different people. And as you move down, he also gets to learn, after learning the skill sets, he also gets to learn the urban trades. So it is of how things are happening in the city, and how it's about entrepreneurship and learning in the trades. And as if you see down, Naga, can you scroll down? Yeah, so the market which informally happens here is a Sunday market. Like it is a market which allows the display of works which happen here, and also the farming which happens. So this is a temporal seasonal market which has a corridor, and as you walk down, there's a seating spaces along the river, and the activity for the celebration of the community happens here. And if we cross the filtration units on the other side, yeah, so up we have the code of water which Anna spoke about, and the farming school. It is majorly thinking of an urban farm where the citizens get to do things which normally they don't do in their normal lives. So if someone wants to learn, is very keen in learning organic farming, but there's no space in the city which allows that thing to happen. So this school conducts workshops, and also it allows the people to come here, and citizens to come here again and again, and to grow things and take from the nature. So if we talk about the idea of love and taking, receiving back from nature what we grow. So this is the agrarian land, and where we also reshape the land, where with the water can be used for agriculture. So there's a reshaping of land, and then after the filtration, it moves towards the river.
So right now, there exists a disconnect between the river and the people. It's barely more than a drain. To bring change to the way the river is, we have to bring change into the way we live, the way we practice. We need to understand the rhythm and the cycles of the river. But if everything that we take can find its way back to the river, then what we take, we can give back. So in this cradle to cradle approach that we're proposing towards river and the way we live.
So to our site, we bring the water that we think we can treat. And so basically, how do you tackle the idea of waste? So the water that we bring into the site, that goes through 3 of the processes, the filtration tanks that we marked out on the plan. The first process being filtering the macroparticles and the plastic that will be recycled in the workshops. And then it goes through the reed bed filtration, which through the microorganisms which are present in the soil and the riverbed, it degrades the organic particles, and the water is finally sent through the sedimentation filtration process and then used to cultivate food. So the idea is how the food production will work in cohesion with the waste management systems that we are proposing, and that the cycle of food production will complement this process of waste management. So basically, whatever we consume and whatever we generate should all go back to the soil, and the cycle of should continue, and we should respect the rhythms that the river has. So we proposed an eco-science toilet, and the waste from there goes to the composting pit. Also, the food that we generally gets wasted in the community kitchen will also go into the composting pit, and that further helps generate the food that we're trying to cultivate here within the activities.
And so as we can see in section, care occurs through physical rhythms. And if you can zoom in, Navya, a little bit, starting from caring. in section, we see different moments of different types of rhythms happening. We see caring and loving coming next to each other, where care is a notion that we relate with childcare. Loving is something that we relate to loving the land, loving the dirt, loving the crops so that they can be nurtured and grow. Cleansing is also another rhythm that we introduced through the filtration system. The idea that we're trying to clean the drain is very central to, it's the central learning process that takes place here. And the plan actually works as a proposal for a new type of drain that could be then used in other places along the Yamuna. But the idea is that the drain is not something that's sort of passive, but the drain is a place where people can learn how to take care of the river, also learn why to take care of the river, and have energy that comes from that whole process or that experience. Renewing and then socializing were also very important in the sense that there was a certain production aspect to the experience. As we were talking about earlier, not just consuming things, but also making sense for why this would work in a city context, and that this project is not sort of away from the public, but is a way to enhance the public, or as Navya said, complement the public. And of course, there should be this aspect of places to free oneself, or at least we hope we can build that into the architecture.
Navya, below. So it's more like proposing a community that's attached to the responsibility and with some kind of an organization in itself, but also with responsibility comes learning, where the levels define the need of a particular space in that place, and learning is learning is complemented with the rigor of work and the rigor of speed and rigor and learning for both elders as well as young adults.
Yeah. So in the third section, we have this invite, the entry place which we have, which invites everybody and anybody. So it is about having no. So then the next phase is about the socializing, where the people get together and meet, and which we talked in the plan. It is about the court of the innocence, where the kids there's garden, there's things where man learns also, and there are things which he unlearns also. So he learns something from the kids and he gets back to his innocence. So Navya, can you scroll down? So in love, man returns to innocence.
My love, we are the river. What is love but a fleeting moment in time? To learn and to unlearn, to create and destroy, to flow with time and to pause in time. What is love but a building, a temple of time and memories? Rich is the field we cultivate, the water, it washes our sins. Water from the river, love of mine, washing me clean as I am washing you.
Thank you for listening. That was our love story.
So, I mean, if since you're talking about love, and it's a very interesting thing to pick on, and I was really wondering whether you missed a step in this law. To me, it is a description of the relationship and not the description of the entities between whom the relationship is. You know? So when I was looking at your initial descriptions of this love between people and the river, and I was imagining that this love will be expressed through the relationship of the building and the river, because you're not doing any form of sort of social engineering or changing people's lives, but you're making buildings. And there I felt that, to me, the plan that you showed, I really wish that instead of concentrating on naming the courtyards and naming the rooms, you had described different relationships between the building and water. One where the building sits right on the edge of the water, one where the building moves far away from the water. You know, love is a very complex sort of phenomenon. And I'm picking on this primarily because you have projected the project in that manner. And somehow I'm wondering whether you got caught up in the wordplay of naming the various spaces rather than looking at what is this relationship between the building and water, and what are the various nuances or articulation of that relationships. Because lovers also fight, lovers also embrace, lovers also need distance. Yeah? So, and so I'm also wondering whether maybe the art, right at the level of core values and maybe in the initial steps, maybe is it that because you're articulating many things, I mean, you talked of time, society and resources and temporality, environment and socio-spatial justice. So on one hand, you talked of that, and then you talked of love. Personally, I would be very hesitant myself to do a project where I pick up so many things to juggle with in one project. I don't know, maybe it's just me. That I would much rather take love and sort of fall in it and uncover the various layers of it.
You know, just to pick up on Kashi's point about this labeling, you know, and relationships in some sense. And I always think that relationships challenge labels. I mean, in some ways, because in that coming together, the distinction of each entity is somewhat merged, is not the word, but transformed. Otherwise, it's not a relationship, it's a transaction. And I was thinking about this in terms of alter ego, because, you know, when you fall in love, there are many dimensions of the self also that are exposed through that relationship, let's put it that way. And I was wondering what of the Yamuna is exposed in this, and what of Delhi is exposed in this, that by themselves you could not know. And in that I felt a little bit that it was more romance than love that was being talked about, that it hadn't got hard enough yet, something to that effect. But this is only to continue. Yeah,
Would just
this
use
is only
the
to
word
continue.
flirtation.
Yes, sir. Right. So yeah.
Rare, it's rare that we talk about architecture like this. So the first thing I would say is that I would tell the group that I really appreciate that you have had the guts to go ahead and talk like this. Because that means you believe something. And I think that is very important. Now, in all the in all the myths about love, and they're more true than our sort of half successful attempts. No, most of us never find love. That's the human condition. But if we do, then very good. But all the stories, whether you take the story of the Dante's story, where there is, I forget the name of her, who he goes. So first there is the longing. You miss, even though you have only had a glimpse, but it starts with longing. And that rasa of viraha is one of the most important rasas. So that your earlier part, before the water came into your sight, and its distance from the river would have been used to create some of the senses that both Kashi and Vyas are talking about. Then there is the fight, because it turns out that there is always a misunderstanding, and that misunderstanding leads to the finest conversations. And that fight is a very interesting one. And then there is the celebration. Now these three stages, celebration is what Kashi talked about when he said that the buildings did not relate to the water. But I think the first two are really important. And the whole question of what is being contested by the two parties, the land and water, or Delhi as humans and Delhi as all life. Those two parties are contesting. What is it that they are contesting? I think that could have become very clear somewhere. And then, or maybe the school itself is something about that, and the fields in which you have allotments for people to grow their own vegetables and so on. That might be that place which is saying, this is where I contest what you are saying. That could perhaps come out a little more sharply. And then this celebration, there I think I sense or I feel that you have never celebrated. In today's life, we are shy of using our bodies, shy of using our voices, shy of using everything that we have, shy of using our eyes and our expressions to celebrate this question of deep attraction. And I think that in your architecture would do that final last step. Then whether the consummation occurs or not is another matter altogether.
So Yamuna and love.
Yes.
So there is Braj, not too far away, with a lot of.
Referring to your thesis actually. Arun's thesis on Braj.
So there is a lot of exploration of, this whole, actually the whole theme of this studio and the way people have been dwelling on nature. And I see a lot of love has gone into what has been imagined. And I think a personification of a lot of that it finds expression through, its cultural expression down in Braj. But then, Yamuna and love is also Taj Mahal. It's also Sufi saints' shrines all along the river and, in Delhi. And then if you and that's the love part of it. And I think overall, even the earlier question of politics, I mean, you love and hate you're talking about, and people mention temporality a lot. And, and Chaya, to your question of whether it should be in Madhya Pradesh, I mean, Delhi is 1,000 years of that strife. And one good thing I learned in all of these diagrams that were shown on Delhi is how this is at the junction of the watershed which goes into the Arabian Sea and the Bay of Bengal. And, and then below the mountains of Himalayas on one side, giving way to the very fertile floodplains of Yamuna and Ganga, then all of this Rajputana on one side. So I mean, there is some talk about temporality. It's here. Look at the physical expression of what goes on along Yamuna, and look at this Humayun's tomb, Purana Kila, Firoz Shah Kotla, Shahjahanabad, all the burning ghats, and all of these. There is a scale to this. There's a scale which has been taken, including the central vista, maybe a little held back from the river. But these are the scales at which politics and occupation of land in Delhi express itself. And then I think earlier on people talked about not addressing the political question. So I think somewhere and I know, Chaya, what you're saying, that all of this is something that we need to sort of rediscover for ourselves and through our body. But I think in being in Delhi and not taking, not being aware even in an indirect way through your body of the politics of being in Delhi, whether you even understood the reality or the concrete issues or not, whether, just the body of the Purana Kila standing there in between the river and the central vista says something and has the potential of being leveraged into something. I mean, all of that, the Grand Trunk Road crosses right there. I mean, that's the root of history. That's where the Phool Walon Ki Sair went from Shahjahanabad to Mehrauli every year. I mean, that itself was a procession which went on this route. It talked about the exile of Bahadur Shah, and the talks of Ashok Vajpayee and Ranjit. So I think I did miss that bit of an interest in the political issue. Whether and I totally appreciate what you were trying to do, but I think even just to be, even in the passing, to be aware of it and to refer to it, and to in the sideways glance to acknowledge it. I would have loved to see at least to have an acknowledgement of the issue that this place has the potency. Why did you choose it? I mean, you chose it for the reason that it is where it is. And I think that's kind of what I missed a little bit.
I would also like to touch upon another point, which is by looking at all the presentations, is on one hand, I fully understand that this entire studio is not about providing solutions. It's not about fully resolved designs. It is about possibility of new directions. And it also is talking about being tentative, about not being sure. But I think we should recognize that thin line between being tentative and being casual or cavalier. And I think that recognition of being unsure and tentative versus being casual to me is very important. So personally, in when I look at all the presentations, that is the question that is sort of churning in my mind. How do we sense that? What is the way in which we are able to sense that these are tentative steps that people are taking, and they are not sure of solutions, but we don't want to be casual about
I just want to say something about the three presentations. And for me, in a way, what is very interesting about the studios and the work of the three groups is that judging not by the propositions made in each of the presentations, but judging by, that first diagram that you showed about the value systems. Judging by values, in terms of the values, this is an incredible counterpoint or alter ego, if you like, to the Central Vista. The first project was largely about time, whereas the Central Vista attempts to make a timeless monumental architecture. The second project was about joy, in a way, like Shilpa pointed out. And it's what the Central Vista is doing is creating an extraordinarily joyless intervention. The third project is about love, and there's nothing more loveless than Central Vista. So in that sense, if you think about these three together as a kind of a counter value system to the Central Vista, I think it's really nice to see.
I sense that nobody wants to talk about love.
No, I do actually.
No, actually, I realize that it is better to be in love than talk about.
Yeah, no, I was thinking when they were talking about love, I was thinking that, okay, so let's say this is about love, and like Riaz very naughtily pointed out, that it's more about romance than love. And in a way, I kind of agree with Riaz, because, for instance, how do we speak about love as in this process of creating or making or doing? I really like Eric Fromm's characterization of love, and he talks about care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge as the key elements of love. And in a way, those would really help kind of structure the proposition that you are making. How do you, and that's exactly why I also say that the Central Vista is the antithesis of all of those things. It has no care for anything. It has no respect, no responsibility, and no knowledge of the society for which it is building. So how does one think about care, respect, responsibility, and knowledge in constructing a proposition for this place that you are intervening in? That could be very interesting.
There may be also something to be said about process in this, right? Because I feel like, say, if one had to manufacture a process that has these kind of core values at its heart, it already feels like it's not a single person's mind which is going to spawn these kind of value systems. It will be a empowered group, and in the structuring of the exercises, especially the Chinese Whispers exercise, I mean, it involves a little bit of stamping on your own ego and picking up someone else's ideas and then making them your own. So I felt like, I mean, what I felt was quite lovely in the way the studio played out was that in the nature of process and the nature of exercises itself, from dealing with large abstractions which you normally are not given in a more kind of time-bound industry-facing project, where you deal with time at geological scales, and then you derive a program and a manifesto based from there, to then coming down to an exercise where you, by design, have to work on someone else's project, and in that then is implicit the idea of taking care and giving respect to that, which I think has been an emerging theme in all the presentations, where there's a certain healthy respect for what you've been given, and you're not looking to subvert, right? I mean, at all times, you're not saying that, okay, this is what I've been given, but I'm still going to lapse into my own preconditions or my own, pre-assumptions. So I feel in some ways there could be a very interesting process critique that, if a project like a Central Vista has to be conceived, what are the processes that need to be in place to be able to award a project like that? Does it need to go to a single firm, for example? Does it need to be first a public competition? Does it need to be For example, there's a separate committee which frames values, then it is given to a separate committee who does the design, then it has a separate committee of karigars, then there's a separate committee of users and abusers. And what are the kind of different checkpoints and value systems that a studio process like Porsche could offer to the way in which projects are conceived and commissioned, right? I feel that that's also very, very potent hidden learning here somewhere, which maybe on a separate forum we could, explore how. Because I think one of the biggest pushbacks to this insane project is the transparency, right? That no one really knows what's going on. No one knows what metrics have been used. No one really knows why it's needed. If we can fit, 200 more people in a budget airline by just squeezing the seats a little bit, would that be possible on a Parliament House, for example, right? So, if there are various ways of value engineering the same brief, and the brief is actually quite nice. It's all about transparency and it's all about these, lovely things. So I think at least the declared core values are fairly utopian. But how that core value system then translates into something like this, there's some sort of a massive problem in terms of process, right? So I think there could be a lot of interesting process deconstruction to what we're doing here as well. Which I think is then common across all groups.
Yeah,
I think it works both ways.
Sorry, go ahead. Sorry.
Go ahead, yes.
No, Sarosh, go ahead.
No, I completely agree. I think Ayaz, you raise a really, really critical point here. But I would argue that it's both ways. I mean, what I find absolutely amazing is also that if you look at all the core values, at least the 3 projects that I've seen, there seems to be almost a kind of broad consensus on core values. I don't think that these are things that we would ideologically sort of disagree with. I think fundamentally we agree that yes, there should be a kind of ecological balance or regeneration. All of the things that have been laid out as core values are absolutely. I would argue that their core values much beyond Central Vista. They kind of point to ways in which we work and function as architects, as citizens. And so then the question is, the question of process is twofold. One is, of course, the kind of projection of process onto the current state of affairs with Central Vista, which is kind of absolutely. It's also easy, like, yes, sure, there are things there, but even within ourselves, if we have to design these things, I think that the tools that we often use, the tools that we have as architects, are tools of all the things that we're taught with, and some of that entails like either form making or this kind of association by naming, which we saw, I think, in the first project and also in the third project, where it was all about this kind of romance of time and really the romance of love. And I think if we have to sort of be more kind of hold ourselves accountable to the core values, then I think it entails a deeper investigation of material flows, processes, measurable things. What does it mean to accord personhood to a river? It opens up a whole other host of things that absolutely challenge our own processes. I think that's what I want to say.
I was just thinking that as part of the kind of large government commission projects, for example, if they had to listen to the 17 talks that happened at Porsche, right? Just that would be enough.
So, I'll offer a perspective here. School of Planning and Architecture is also just along the river, not too far from here. And you look at the kind of issues that School of Planning and Architecture in their urban design and architecture projects, they focus very well on a lot of precincts of Delhi. Great studies. But I think from whatever I do know, and I don't know, frankly, all the work they do, but I do understand they they did not ever very seriously address the issue of Central Vista in any of their studios. They don't. They skirt around it. So to answer, your question is this. What we are doing here and what Porsche is doing is, you need something more stable, and you can question the nature of institutions and what they're able to do. But it's really, I would have expected that this is a question that should have always been sort of, as a central topic of discussion in an institution like SPA.
Can I come back to what Sarosh was?
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
Many of the things I would 100% agree with you about flows of material, paying attention to them, being clear about palpable reality. However, the one thing which you have pointed out, I think third or fourth time during the day, is about the association of names and then the process of thinking from there. If that happens superficially, then it's completely wrong. If that happens in a way that it builds a certain generative energy to do something, then I consider it an equally, if not more valid form of reason than the reason which engineers reality. And
I wouldn't disagree with that. It's a question of, I think, like, to pick up Riaz's point about the difference between romance and love, I think the last project is a good example of, if you look at the core values, you can sort of go back to their core values and distill love in almost each of them. And I think that would entail a much more rigorous investigation of love from, a human, non-human, like, there are multiple layers, and it would entail maintenance, because I think that the one other thing that's, just to expound on this, if we must, the difference between romance and love is that love entails maintenance, right? A lot of maintenance. And I think that this idea of ecological maintenance.
I never knew that.
Oh, well. So no, but I agree. I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying that these things become dangerous because they can live then at the realm of the.
Maintenance is transactional.
Sarosh, I think you mean care.
No, I mean maintenance in the sense that Miriam Laderman-Ukeles, who was an artist, she does this performance. She goes into a gallery and she just sweeps the floors of the gallery. That's all she does. And that is an art project, and I mean, in that sense, the maintenance of a kind of ecological balance is also, this is where I find the core values to be much more evocative, much more useful, perhaps. And I don't disagree that, yes, love is surely a useful attribute, but it is about the scales at which it is enacted. Let me just leave it at that.
I hate to leave it at that. However,
no, so in fact, when I was looking at the third group, if I come back to the third group and the question of love, of course, people can define it differently. But for me, the way I look at it, it's very difficult to talk of reason when you're talking of love. I would be very skeptical to talk about love from a rational perspective. It is an emotional perspective with which to talk of love. And I was looking at the grids that they were drawing on the plan, the squares that they were making on the plan. It's a rational act. It's not a loving.
Absolutely.
That's how I would look at it. So if I say that the project doesn't have to be a solution, you can just point to directions. It would talk of the love with which you look at.
I used to have a colleague who was an anthroposophist, Schindler's variety. And he used to say that people who live in square buildings make war, and people who live in round buildings are peaceful. Kashi, your idea of the grid as reasonable and rational is as worthless as that.
No, but no, I would say that look at the manner in which it is put over the water body in plan. No, I'm talking of the use of the grid. I'm not talking of the grid in itself, the use of the grid by the group in the plan. Not the grid as an entity in itself. The manner in which the grid is overlaid on the topography and the way the water flows.
Every piece of woven cloth.
Chaya, I mean, we shouldn't be reading too much on the circular buildings. Huh? That parliament is a circle. Nothing much, not much love coming out of there.
Yeah. So I didn't agree with that man. We had a fight in the department at Nairobi.
Right. I want to go back to, this question of core values, because I mean, one of the lectures that actually I felt was asking us about this was Prem's lecture. I mean, when he, this kind of sense that you can have three regimes with very, very different core values using the same grand vista typology and form to express completely different things. And we were trained in that method where the concept sketch and the initial, how would you say, the initial idea set then expresses itself into a kind of reasonable building or a reasonable expression in formal terms, and that kind of causal relationship. I think that what that lecture opened up is that the entire 4-part exercise that was given after the core values and the sequence that you follow in order to make those core values manifest, and this is where I think I understand what Sarosh is saying. That all those processes have to constantly be answerable to the core values. It's not about the fact that I had this set of ideas at the core and then I can express them directly. It's all the various dimensions of making them that also have to be answerable to that core values. So I think that in that process, material, in that process, thinking through people and relationships, or whether one looks at it in terms of love or other ways, I think that's an important part of it, because otherwise that diagram or that set of values can easily manifest itself or be used in other manners. And I think that for me is a really important kind of answerability in terms of the way that the architect practices. So I just wanted to put that into this conversation, because otherwise we can use a set of words so easily, and the answerability to those words can always be construed as subjective or my interpretation and all of that. And unless it is embedded into a cycle of practice that that has to go through this process of answerability, there must be consensus. Otherwise, we are not. Otherwise, those core values is no different from a branding slogan. In terms of its depth, in terms of the way that it embodies whether the toothpaste actually cleans your teeth or not. I mean, if it's it has to have that that directness of I don't know what the words. I think I made my point. Yeah.
Can I make a provocative
Oh, sure,
proposition
please.
here? So, I mean, the question of the political. So
the question of the political, I see.
The overall, you know. So let's say just a scenario, huh? COVID situation. All the workers, instead of walking back home, they love our Prime Minister. They walk to Central Vista, and they occupy all of that open space all the way down to the river. And of course, there is a pandemic, and all the representatives need to address their constituents who are from all over India because they all come to Delhi. And they need to then form their groups, find solutions, and this resolution of what is to be done, what is to be created, what's the temporary, what's the long term, what is the discussion and what is the answer, and what's the process and what's the articulation, plays out in a manner which is totally political, and leads to a new articulation. I mean, that to me may be the issue of how does India occupy its capital.
My only thought about that might be that it's not succeeded in Belarus. It has not succeeded in US, where the police continue to do whatever they want to do. And so many lakhs of farmers walking has not had any effect. We live in a time of a different kind, where such eruptions are seen as opportunities rather than corrections of course. It's a very, very tempting provocation that you have given. But I think the temptation is a little bit too tempting. I'm a bit wary of it.
Would any of the participants like to respond to any of the conversation that's been taking place? Because I think we have already been sitting for 3 hours plus. So we will start winding down. Yeah, sorry, yes.
Riaz, I think Gayatri wrote a message on the chat. So maybe she would like to say what she was saying.
Gayatri, should I read it out for you?
Yeah, I think so. I don't think I can speak too well.
Hussain, will you read it and
yeah, I can read it out. Okay,
thanks.
so Gayatri says, I suppose it is also the question of cutting a bit of slack as far as the core values are concerned and going ahead with some, if not all. I think what the studio really has cracked is the sheer time it takes to propose a project such as Central Vista and how much thought and care it requires. These 4 weeks are just the first tiny steps. Doing such a project in a non-violent manner has to be a slow process, not a super quick violent one. Approaching it Therav will automatically settle many issues that the current Central Vista raises. Just a thought.
Hussain, can you email me the statement from Frankfurt that you have given so that oh, you have given the book also. Okay. I didn't realize.
Yeah, that's the Harry Frankfurt book, which is also great. And the one I mentioned was Eric Fromm, The Art of Loving.
One knows, that's my generation's art.
Okay.
I think to Gayatri's point, I think, anything that slows the process allows for iteration, right? I mean, so I think, and I mean, along with the speed of the project, I guess so many other checks and balances could be placed. I think one of the things that especially a lot of, like one of the biggest change-making paradigms now is actually in engineering and coding, right? Where people are coding these kind of black box algorithms that affect the lives of billions of people on the planet. But we have a very, very faint idea about how these algorithms actually work. And what's happening is that when small teams make large decisions, you sort of end up hard coding a lot of bias into them. So I think the more diverse the team that there is to kind of propose projects, the diversity of the team itself is a kind of a benchmark. So, I mean, one of the, I guess, initial checks and balances would also be the composition of the team that conceives of these projects. How is it represented? Are there enough women on it? Are there enough, members from different, communities? And I think that's also one really nice subtext of this studio is that, the teams have been very well represented in terms of, gender balance, in terms of, varied perspectives from around the world.
All except the instructor team.
Yeah, that's a problem.
We will deal with.
But I completely agree with the slow part that Gayatri is saying, that there has to be a certain slowness. But I also think that simultaneously there has to be a certain preparedness as to what is the sort of riyaz you have done, that when you get a project, you are bringing all the knowledge and awareness that you already have about architecture at large into that project. It's like a doctor meeting a patient, and the doctor meets the patient only for 15 minutes. That doesn't mean that he or she starts thinking about medicine when the patient comes. They are bringing that much knowledge to the table, and that is where I think the whole idea of how do we practice architecture outside the project. That before we get a project, we are sort of practicing or prepping ourselves for the project. I think is also an important dimension.
I think that's also a corollary to that because, for example, I mean, we've just done this one really random thought experiment. Like, say, for example, what if to bid for a project of this kind, you have to have a carbon negative practice. Right, if that's the, say, qualifying criteria that you as a practice need to have a zero carbon footprint, I mean, that would instantly blacklist almost like 90% of, studios in India.
You'd be surprised how many studios would get through IAS, and you don't want those studios. It has become a very fashionable thing these days, and it really reflects nothing of what the quality of the studio is at all. I can tell you that from a place which is extremely keen on all this, and it's no reflective of quality of.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I completely get it. I'm just saying that, a random metric could actually change many things
Just
about the way.
I wanted to also put in one sentence here because, I mean, how can the past define the future? Because it can also put an ethical question. Okay, the studios which have not indulged in right practices so far and are willing to change, they're not given the opportunities.
Yeah.
I mean, it's so much like everything is so twisted in this. I mean, I'm even thinking about like what Hera, like if we are talking of the slowness, then how slow? Because sometimes in the process of slowness, the, whole things or the scenarios can also change.
I recently heard a very interesting conversation between the philosopher Sundar Sakurai and a physicist from the US whose name Roger Melina. And Sundar said something very interesting about slow thinking versus fast thinking. And he said that fast thinking is very important for survival in all organisms, and it is something that is based on bias, and you need bias. It's a very, very useful thing that is required in order that you are able to be impulsive and reactive, and that's it's a very important it's a very important characteristic to have. But he said that that bias is built by slow thinking, and that bias is built by, and if I take Kashi's point, preparedness, and it is done much before you are put into the situation into which you have to react. So if I look at our studio, I would say that if you are already if there is a certain consensus, as Sarvesh was talking about, what core values are important to all of us, then the question is that how do we then start building up a preparedness for those in order to engage and respond quickly to when we are put into situations where those core values have to be answered to. And I think that to me is what preparation is about. I mean, that one may have earlier biases, but one is working at restructuring them and reconfiguring them so that one can respond in a more appropriate manner as one goes on. So Kashi, Kashi, you can read Gayatri's response to you. Well, it's open to everyone, so that's fine. Do any of the other participants have any comments or responses? Anybody else? We are coming to the end of our first studio at Porsche, and yeah, some last comments by anyone?
Hi. This is Smita. I just wanted to say that the entire process which we followed, and for me, it was the best part was being respectful to each other's views, thoughts, and everything else that was being put out. As in, it was a way in which we were being sort of receptive to everything, like being open, just to each other's concepts and thought processes and everything. Like it was for me a very that openness was something that I really felt was the best part about this for me. As in in the way the lectures were held, talking about poetry and architecture. I mean, I could not have imagined that, and I loved that part, and also that played out in the entire studio, not just the part of the lectures, but the way exercises were structured, as you guys were just talking about it, that you pass on an idea to the other group, and the other group considers something as like it becomes their own, and doing it in a respectful manner. So I just wanted to say it was amazing to be part of this kind of studio, and I will keep doing that, being just receptive to other ideas, and yeah, that's what I wanted to say.
Thank you, Smita.
Can I just make an attempt at sort of trying to answer the question by Vishwanath Kashikar? Because he's saying that if this is the starting point, where or how should the studio end? I mean, I think as like it started with the studio, the first exercise, like timelessness, or I mean, why are we putting the beginning or starting or ending to everything? Because even though like this sort of this online chats, they will finish, they will end, but whatever interaction has happened, I think it's already touched what it was supposed to do. It has already done a part of it. It's given a stimulus to so many of us in a different way. So I think the work has already been done. So it's not going to end anywhere. It will just be continuing in a different way. But yeah, that's what's important is perhaps like how to get a right kind of momentum, because when we see, I mean, there are so many things, which are just not falling into this framing of, even the common sensibility, logic. Lots of things are just, and which are being attempted at a large scale. And these things are also going to touch our lives and the lives of the future generation. And so all those things, I mean, I think that's a challenge, and that's something, I mean, I don't know. I mean, I can't even think of answering that now, because it's just something which it has its own process. I have a very small part to play. I can just think of where I can fit in, what I can be doing. But yeah, I mean, I cannot be answering it probably.
I completely agree, Mansi. It is from that perspective I am asking that this studio anyways is not trying to provide a solution, right? So what I'm asking is that imagine the final presentation of this studio is 7 years from now, okay? After 7 years, you give your final presentation. I am asking after 4 weeks, what would you have done in the 4 weeks, or what drawing would you not have done right now, today, if in your mind the project would have ended 7 years? Are there some things you have done in a hurry just because in some ways this is a culmination discussion? Is the question I'm opening up. So I'm not in any way suggesting that this should be the end.
That way, I think as a participant, I can try to answer that. I think the good part was like there was no pressure of deadline or anything which was put on us, because as like the exercises were introduced, so was also the concept that one should enjoy the process and shouldn't just look for the final result. So we were really not worried about having the complete plans and the complete details. We were actually enjoying the process. So I think yeah, so I'm not sure, like I think probably for 7 years it might have become a little too boring to be engaged with the same sort of exercise, or trying to just think about the same thing over and over, or probably I think we might be going on and off, like so no, I think the pace was pretty good. I obviously, if given more time, we would have come out with more details. It would have added, but sometimes again, that's a big question, how time, I mean, what is how much is the right amount of time for any sort of exercise or any sort of thinking? Sometimes we we do the mathematical calculations also. I mean, somewhere I've read beyond 45 minutes, the attention span, it just goes off. So like after 45 minutes, if we are still having the discussion for, let's say, another 2 hours on the same subject, so is it really relevant? And what have we really absorbed in those 2 hours following those 45 minutes? So, I mean, I think, yeah, for me, I think it went pretty well. I'm not sure how I would have, if it had gone and for a long time or whatever. Yeah, others can also speak.
Regarding that, about time and space for each of the exercises, I think like the ideas that came out like this way was because of the timing. No, it was like, of course, we like also because most of us didn't meet before, like didn't know each other like before this. No, so it was like you have really small time to get to know what you were thinking, and then like to try to convey to the team, and then you have like 2 days to prepare it all and to discuss and all that. And I think that is a really nice timing for this kind of workshops, because it has like to be quickly, and but also I think what is really important and what it has been said here is like to enjoy all times, because then if you're only caught on stress, then the imagination won't run as in like if you're enjoying it. And in that sense, I think all the lectures that we have like put that creativity in our minds, like all throughout the workshop, at least for me. And I want to thank everyone like for this opportunity, because like at least I have been in, I haven't been in ASAF mission in the past years. So for me, it was like, oh, okay, I didn't like even remember how to use all these programs and to like work with all these people, and with from like coming back to India in a way that I like dream of in a long time. So thank you. And all the conversations and all the discussions were so enriching with all the people. And we should make it at least once every few months, because it's really interesting to talk all of this with all of you. Thank you.
Okay, I think we are at 3.5 hours and it's a good time to end. It's been 5 weeks of intense engagement. I want to thank all of you, the instructors, the participants, all of you all for this really, really intense engagement. Thank you. Professor Chaya, if there's something you would like to say.
I think it's been a wonderful time. I didn't expect that I would get so deeply engrossed in this studio. I thought I would come in from time to time, but I couldn't stay away, not a single day. And I think we have met some very good people, all of us, and we'll continue to remain in touch. Today I have been a little rude to Sarosh and Kashi and Hussain, for which I apologize. Normally I am much more circumspect in my use of language. However, I thought here was a good friendly time, and I think that's the atmosphere of this studio is like that one lets go slightly differently. So I'm sure they will understand also. So I think wonderful, and thank you everybody thank you Riaz and Sudipto for organizing everything. Thank you Oves and especially Vignesh. Thank you Gayatri. Thank you the other Shilpa also, who in between had to, for family reasons, not continue. But I think the whole thing has worked because all of these people did everything that was in the background, and in the foreground was all this kind of wonderful discussion about love and time and all that kind of stuff, which I think can be somewhat self-indulgent at times, but it is not to be laughed out of court. And so thank you.
Thank you, thank you. Thank you, Professor Chaya. Thank you, Riaz. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's a pleasure, yeah, whatever.
Yeah, it's nice. It ended on a discussion on love. So, and I think it was a lot of love, which put it together. I think I consider myself privileged to have sort of sat through this. Thank you all.
Thank you all, and looking forward season 2. Thank you again.